What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in MHA as THUNDERGOD Denki, Superstar Superhero, Part 5. If you enjoy this type of content, please gently eradicate the like button. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Remember to check out the original story linked in the description. Without further ado, let's get into the legend of the Thunder God. Godspeed. This move was an upgraded version of Kaminari's high-speed movement. It not only allowed him to reach even faster speeds and heightened reflexes, but also provided a layer of armor through the intense lightning that wrapped around his body. The electric energy coating acted as a barrier, giving his attacks more impact and durability. In this state, every punch, every kick was like a charged-up version of his lightning fist. Although it was still a ways off from his ultimate goal, it was beginning to resemble a prototype of the thunder armor he envisioned. But there were limitations. Maintaining this form drained his energy faster than high-speed movement did. Every attack and every block burned through his stamina, and sustaining the form for only 10 minutes consumed almost as much power as his chain lightning attack against Tamura Shigaraki. And yet, there was no denying that this form looked incredible. The golden electric flames flickering over his body made him appear larger than life, and his usually tousled blonde hair now stood on end, crackling with electricity. He looked like a golden, electrified version of a Super Saiyan. Of course, his power was nowhere near that level. But hey, looking cool counted for something, right? With Godspeed, Kaminari's strength had undeniably leveled up. Whoosh! Ha! Can't keep up with that speed, Todoroki muttered, watching Kaminari blur into the distance. The icy path he had created was still effective, but Kaminari's speed had forced him to abandon the idea of competing purely on speed. His right side, covered in frost from his earlier quirk usage, was now defrosting as he ran at full tilt, regaining warmth from his own body heat. It's only the first event. No need to push too hard. As long as I secure first place in the end, Todoroki thought, his face set in steely determination. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of explosions filled his ears. Without looking, he knew who it was. Bakugo blasted himself forward with violent bursts, catching up to Todoroki and sneering down at him from midair. Yo, half-and-half bastard. Having trouble keeping up, Todoroki remained silent, glancing briefly at Bakugo to assess his speed. His explosions are getting stronger. He's heating up over time. Just behind them, a third group was making steady progress. Ida sprinted at high speed, while Tsuyu leaped gracefully over obstacles. Hatsume zoomed along in her support gear, and Momo pedaled a small electric bike she'd crafted just for the event. In the air, Shoji used his replicated arms as makeshift wings to fly, drawing admiration from everyone who saw him. His creativity with his quirk was impressive. Rah! Back near the starting line, Midoriya let out a desperate cry as he willed his body forward. The display screen in the stadium zoomed in on him, his face set in fierce determination. That's A1 Suzuka Midoriya, Present Mike shouted excitedly, his voice booming across the stadium. Where did that insane speed come from? The audience's eyes widened as they saw the red energy lines tracing Midoriya's arms, neck, and face. Present Mike leaned forward, eyeing the screen in astonishment. What's the deal with his quirk? What's it called? He asked, turning to Aizawa, who remained silent. The truth was, even Aizawa didn't know the exact name of Midoriya's quirk. It hadn't been listed on his file. It's a high-impact quirk, very powerful, Aizawa murmured, his voice laced with concern. But it also comes with serious drawbacks. Watching Midoriya pushing himself to the limit, Aizawa felt a twinge of worry. He'd seen Midoriya injure himself severely with just one arm in previous training. If he was using that power across his entire body now, he's surpassing them. Present Mick's voice rang out, louder than ever. Midoriya Izuku has blown past the third group of contestants. He's catching up to Todoroki and Bakugo, and he's gaining on them fast. In the special viewing booth, All Might clenched his fists, watching his successor on the screen. Midoriya's fierce determination was visible in his eyes, and the power of one for all burned within him. Did his will to win accidentally ignite one for all, allowing it to adjust naturally? All Might wondered. While everyone marveled at Midoriya's speed, Kaminari had already reached the second obstacle. Oh, I can't use God's speed here, he realized, eyeing the terrain. While the move gave him incredible speed, it lacked flexibility in confined spaces. Without a clear, straight path, using it here would be more of a hindrance than a help. He'd either have to commit to a full-speed dash or risk a hard fall. Sighing, Kaminari relaxed his quirk. The electric flames around him fizzled out, leaving only a few sparks dancing across his body. His blonde hair, which had been standing on end, settled back down. As he glanced over his shoulder, he could see Bakugo and Todoroki approaching fast. Bakugo had just overtaken Todoroki and was now Kaminari's closest competitor. With no time to waste, Kaminari leaped forward, keeping his balance as he ran across the narrow steel beams and crossed the towering pillars that stretched across the course. He moved with practiced ease, his every step calm and sure. Spectators across the stadium, including several pro heroes, watched him in admiration. In a traditional Japanese room in the Mitsui ancestral home, an elderly man in a black kimono sat calmly on a tatami mat, watching Kaminari's performance on a large television screen. His face broke into a small smile. "So what do you think now?" he asked, his voice carrying an air of authority. Next to him knelt a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, watching the screen with a skeptical expression. "He has potential," he admitted reluctantly. "But are we sure he's worth using the super-intelligent shape memory alloy for his gear?" The old man chuckled softly. "If he takes first place, grant him the alloy for his combat uniform. He saved my life. I believe this is a suitable way to repay him." "And if he doesn't win first?" the man in the suit asked, hopeful that he might not have to part with such a precious material. "If he places second or lower, then we'll forego the intelligent alloy, but he'll still receive a top-grade combat uniform. My life isn't so cheap." "Understood," Mitsui Yusuke replied, nodding in deference. He was willing to invest in Kaminari, but parting with the alloy would be a last resort. "Still, if we can make a suit using our best tech, it should be impressive." "It's up to you now, Kaminari," the old man murmured, his eyes fixed on the screen. He watched as Kaminari navigated the pillars with ease, showing a level of composure and skill that impressed even him. "I'm already catching up, huh?" Kaminari turned his head to see Bakugo flying through the air, propelled by the continuous explosions from his hands. That ability to fly really gives him an edge, Kaminari thought to himself, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Thunder idiot," Bakugo bellowed. "Get it through your head. I'm your biggest rival. First place is mine." The explosions from Bakugo's palms added an extra burst of intensity to his words as he closed in on Kaminari. Kaminari just chuckled to himself. "If I had my coins, a shot from my railgun would have sent you flying right now." He couldn't help but feel a bit annoyed. Since the school had banned any equipment aside from clothing, he wasn't allowed to carry the metal coins he used for his ranged railgun attacks. It was frustrating. Without those, he was left with fewer long-range options. "If I hadn't mastered God's speed and high-voltage mode just in time, I wouldn't even be confident competing against Todoroki and Bakugo in this sports festival." Kaminari sighed, recognizing that he still had a lot of room to grow. His reliance on equipment only highlighted his need to strengthen his own abilities further. Meanwhile, he approached the end of the second level, with Bakugo just about caught up to him, their fierce rivalry igniting once again. "I'm number one," Bakugo roared, pushing himself even harder. Trailing close behind them was Todoroki, who kept his focus on maintaining his place in the top three. He decided that he didn't need to fight for first place in this round. As long as he secured a top position, that would be enough. But his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of someone screaming from behind. "Midoriya?" Todoroki glanced back, surprised by what he saw. Midoriya was somehow racing along the steel beams with green energy crackling around his body, giving him a speed and agility that Todoroki hadn't expected to see. "What's going on?" Todoroki thought, eyes widening slightly. "He looks just like Kaminari." But with green lightning? Midoriya caught his gaze and shouted, determination burning in his eyes. "Todoroki, I'm giving everything I've got in this race too." His words, broadcast live, reached the ears of everyone watching across Japan. Unbeknownst to Kaminari, His earlier 100,000 volts attack had pushed Midoriya to his limit, awakening a new understanding of his power. In his desperation, Midoriya had figured out how to channel 5% of his quirk throughout his body, keeping it within a manageable range. The famed Midoriya miracle was in full effect. This kid, he really is something, Kaminari thought, glancing back briefly. That hero spirit, it's something else. Todoroki, however, was no longer calm. The icy chill radiating from his right side intensified as he activated his quirk again. I can't let this green-haired kid overtake me. I can accept Kaminari and Bakugo ahead of me. But there's no way I'm losing to Midoriya. With renewed determination, Todoroki summoned a massive wave of ice, creating a bridge that spanned across the remaining pillars in front of him. While this would make it easier for others to follow, he didn't care anymore. His pride was on the line. Back in the lead, Kaminari and Bakugo had cleared the second level and were now on a stretch of flat ground, which immediately turned into a battlefield. Bakugo, fired up and relentless, was attacking Kaminari every chance he got. Boom, boom, boom. Each blast left craters in the ground, sending clouds of dust into the air. Bakugo's crazed laughter echoed with each explosion, making him look more like a villain than a hero. Wahahaha! Get ready, Thunder Idiot! Bakugo shouted, wild-eyed. I'm blowing you out of my way. First place is mine. With a fierce grin, he launched himself forward, aiming a powerful blast at Kaminari. But Kaminari wasn't about to just sit back and take it. He retaliated with his own lightning-charged punch. Boom! Their powers clashed, sending a shockwave that rippled across the course. Bakugo was pushed back, stumbling as he tried to regain his balance. But Kaminari wasn't done. Golden lightning surged around him, and with a burst of speed, he activated Godspeed once more, charging forward in a dazzling blur. Get out of my way, Bakugo! Kaminari yelled, lashing out with a lightning-imbued kick. Wham! Bakugo was sent flying back, tumbling across the ground, sparks of electricity crackling around him. Bakugo! Midoriya called out, shocked by the sight of his rival being knocked back so forcefully. Shut up, Deku! Bakugo snarled, his expression twisted with rage. He was too focused on Kaminari to even register Midoriya's own transformation. Thunder Idiot! I'm not done with you. With an explosive push from his palms, Bakugo propelled himself forward again, ignoring the pain in his arms from the sheer force he was using. Fueled by adrenaline and pure stubbornness, he hurtled forward, determined to catch up. Now the second group was a high-stakes race between Todoroki, Midoriya, and Bakugo. The big screens showed their progress side by side, each of them giving their all in an intense battle for second place. Kaminari, now with a comfortable lead, soon reached the third obstacle. The final stage for Kaminari Denki, the first in the lead, a massive minefield. Present Mike announced, his voice brimming with excitement. The staff really outdid themselves with this one. If you look carefully, you can actually see where the mines are buried, he explained. Keep your eyes open and tread carefully. Hearing this over the stadium's loudspeakers, several of Kaminari's classmates back on the ice track like Tetsu, Kyoka, Ida, and Momo couldn't help but gasp. Has Kaminari already made it that far? This is tricky. I'm not sure how fast these mines detonate. Kaminari muttered to himself, looking out at the maze of hidden explosives in front of him. The darker patches of ground clearly indicated where the mines were buried, but they were scattered randomly across the path, making navigation a challenge. Well, can't waste any more time. Let's go. With the sounds of explosions and cheers from the audience spurring him on, Kaminari activated the more flexible high-speed movement and darted into the minefield. However, his speed wasn't as fast as usual because he still had to rely on his eyes, carefully watching his steps. Not far behind, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Midoriya reached the minefield as well. Mines? Like I care. Bakugo laughed wildly, his palms flaring as he launched himself over the ground with blasts from his hands, completely ignoring the mines below. Thunder Idiot! I'm coming for you. TCH, these last two obstacles were basically custom-made for Bakugo. Kaminari muttered as he pushed forward, sensing Bakugo's intense pressure right behind him. Despite his best efforts to stay ahead, he couldn't deny the advantage Bakugo's explosive mobility gave him. Looks like I'll need to work on some kind of flying technique in the future. Sure enough, Bakugo's relentless blasts propelled him forward, and soon he was nearly level with Kaminari. But this time, surprisingly, Bakugo held back from attacking. He simply maintained his speed, his intense gaze focused straight ahead. I'll show that golden-haired idiot and crush him at the finish line, Bakugo thought, his competitive spirit raging. For once, he'd managed to hold his temper in check. But Kaminari wasn't about to let him keep that advantage. If Bakugo could keep up his momentum, he could very well snatch first place. Godspeed, activate, Kaminari shouted, letting out a roar as golden lightning flared around him, enveloping his body in an aura of electric flames. He intentionally stepped on one of the landmines on the ground, triggering an explosion that launched him into the air, using the blast to rocket forward at high speed. Bakugo was startled as Kaminari surged forward in a blur of light, appearing just above him in an instant. Take this! Kaminari's voice rang out as he swung his leg down in a powerful golden kick. Guillotine drops. Like hell you're hitting me again, Bakugo snarled. His reflexes kicked in, his body twisting midair as he threw his hands up, catching Kaminari's attack with an explosive counter. Boom! The resulting explosion lit up the sky, a mix of fiery blasts and electric arcs that blinded everyone watching. Oh my god! Kyoka shouted, arriving at the edge of the minefield just in time to witness the massive explosion lighting up the sky. Was that Kaminari and Bakugo? They're really pushing each other to the limit, Ida said in awe, eyes wide behind his glasses as he tried to process the sheer scale of power. Todoroki and Midoriya, who were close enough to feel the shockwave, instinctively shielded themselves from the blast. Todoroki quickly created a small ice shield to block the incoming debris, while Midoriya backflipped to stay steady. These two, Todoroki muttered, squinting into the smoke. But rather than wait, he saw this as an opportunity. Without hesitation, he summoned his ice powers, creating a clear frozen path through the minefield. The icicle road let him move forward quickly, stepping over the dangerous ground below. Father, I hope you're watching. I don't need your power to come out on top. Behind him, Midoriya watched the path forming with wide eyes, realizing Todoroki's strategy. But rather than hold back, he steeled himself and stepped onto Todoroki's ice. I'm sorry, Todoroki, Midoriya muttered, his face set with determination as he dashed across the icy path right behind him. This might be taking advantage of you, but I have my own reasons for needing to win. The memory of All Might handing him a piece of his hair flashed through his mind. I won't let All Might down. Down in the minefield, as Todoroki and Midoriya raced across the icy path, a figure emerged from the thick smoke above, Bakugo, tumbling from the air, looking visibly enraged. He crashed into one of Todoroki's ice structures with a heavy impact, cracking the surface under him. Kaken! Midoriya called out, leaping onto the ice next to him, concern flashing across his face. Get out of my way, Deku! Bakugo snapped, shoving Midoriya back. His gaze was locked onto the golden streak, still moving ahead. That's twice now, Kaminari. Bakugo's arms trembled from the strain, but his anger fueled him. Ignoring the pain, he launched himself forward with another explosive blast. Todoroki took advantage of the opening to keep pushing forward, reclaiming second place. Above, on the stadium's big screen, Kaminari's actions replayed in slow motion for the audience. Covered in crackling golden flames, Kaminari had managed to kick Bakugo away and used the force of the explosion to somersault midair. As he descended, he twisted his body gracefully to regain balance. Whoa! Is our son really this strong? Kaminari's mother murmured in amazement, watching the replay with wide eyes. I honestly didn't know, his father replied, equally stunned. This was the first time they'd ever seen Kaminari in a real fight, and the intensity of his abilities left them speechless. Whoa, whoa! Present Mick's excited voice echoed through the stadium. He turned to Aizawa, who was watching calmly. Eraserhead, did you expect your students to be this powerful? Not exactly, Aizawa replied evenly. They're pushing each other, which is what brings out the best in them. On the screen, the leaderboard showed Kaminari still in first, with Todoroki, Bakugo, and Midoriya fighting to catch up. But Kaminari's lead was impressive. In the arena, Kaminari rocketed forward, his eyes focused intently on the path ahead. All those years of training in Omiya Park. Every day, every hour, every bolt of electricity I pushed through myself. I won't let all that work go to waste. As he neared the end of the minefield, he realized he was about to stall, his momentum dying as he approached the ground. It's not over yet. 100,000 volts, he yelled, releasing a massive burst of energy from his body in all directions. The flash of golden electricity was blinding, surging outward in a wild storm that rattled the entire minefield. Is he insane? Todoroki shouted, blocking the shockwave with an ice wall. He couldn't understand why Kaminari was expending so much energy now, seemingly just to buy a few seconds. But as the electricity surged, Kaminari used the blast to propel himself forward, the resulting shockwaves triggering all the mines around him. The entire minefield erupted in a chain reaction of explosions. In the midst of the fiery chaos, Kaminari performed a final mid-air flip, riding the momentum to land neatly on the edge of the field, right before the final corridor. With a smirk, Kaminari looked back at the chaotic explosions behind him and muttered to himself, "If only I'd looked back at that." Without wasting another moment, he activated his high-speed movement once again and sprinted into the final corridor, leaving the minefield and his competition behind. And here we have it, our first competitor returning to the stadium. Present Mick's voice boomed across the arena, amping up the crowd as Kaminari dashed through the tunnel and back onto the field. "It's Kaminari. Denki!" Present Mike shouted, practically vibrating with excitement. The audience erupted in cheers, their voices reverberating through the stadium as if it was about to shake apart. "Kaminari! Kaminari! Kaminari! Kaminari Denki of Class A. He's done exactly what he promised and taken the lead in the very first event." Present Mike continued hyping up the crowd. "Let's look forward to his performance in the next rounds. Can he go all the way to the top?" Kaminari's mom, sitting in the stands, clutched her hands to her chest, eyes bright with pride. "That's my son. Look at him go." Kaminari's dad, usually reserved, nodded with a wide grin. "Yeah, he's really something." Meanwhile, far away in the League of Villains hideout, a certain figure shrouded in darkness watched the live broadcast with sharp interest. On the screen, Kaminari's electric form shone as he claimed victory. Standing nearby, Kurojiri observed the villain Tamura Shigaraki's reaction. Still battered from his last encounter with Kaminari, Shigaraki's eyes held a mixture of rage and something more determination. "This brat," Shigaraki muttered, his voice laced with bitterness. The imposing figure in the shadows gave a low, amused hum. Impressive control over his quirk for his age. "No wonder he gave you such trouble, Shigaraki." Shigaraki's fists clenched as he continued to glare at the screen. "I'll make him pay for what he did." Back at the stadium, one by one, the remaining contestants reached the finish line. First came Todoroki, then Midoriya, and finally Bakugo, fuming with rage as he realized he hadn't taken the top spot. The final rankings flashed across the 4 large screens in the arena. First place, Kaminari Denki. Second place, Shoto Todoroki. Third place, Izuka Midoriya. Fourth place, Katsuki Bakugo. Fifth place, Ibara Shiozaki. Sixth place, Hantashiro. Seventh place. Tenya Ida as Kaminari laughed and celebrated with Kyoka, Momo, and Tetsu. Bakugo's eyes narrowed into slits, his fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. "Damn it," Bakugo seethed, his voice like a low growl. "Once again, he beat me to first place." Kirishima chuckled nervously, trying to calm him down. "Come on, man, fourth place isn't so bad." "It's awful," Bakugo exploded, his face twisted with frustration. "I'm the strongest, damn it. I'm not supposed to come in fourth." Meanwhile, Ida stared down at his own hands in dismay. "How did I lose a speed contest?" But before he could dwell too long, Midnight's sultry voice echoed across the stadium as she announced the next event. "Now that the first event has concluded, it's time for our second challenge." She cracked her whip theatrically, pointing toward the virtual screen as it flickered and updated to display the words, "Cavalry Battle." "Oh, that sounds interesting," Kaminari mused, raising an eyebrow with a smirk. Nearby, Azui looked puzzled, tilting her head. "A cavalry battle? Isn't that usually a team event? How will this work for an individual competition?" Midnight smiled wickedly. "Good question. Here's how it works." A virtual display appeared, showing diagrams of how the cavalry battle would work, with chibi versions of All Might, Present Mike, and Number 13 acting as models. Each contestant will form teams of 2 to 4 people, creating a horse to carry one rider. The objective? To steal headbands from other teams. Midnight explained, gesturing dramatically. Momo adjusted her glasses thoughtfully. "So depending on the teammates you choose, your team's total point value will vary." "Exactly," Midnight confirmed, turning back to the contestants. Kaminari noticed Kyoka giving him a glance from the corner of her eye. Despite her usual calm demeanor, she looked a little worried. Still confident, huh? Kyoka thought, watching Kaminari as he casually brushed off the pressure. Midnight continued with the explanation. Now here's where it gets interesting. Each contestant's point value will depend on their ranking from the last event. The last place finisher starts with 5 points, with each subsequent position earning 5 points more than the one before it. Kaminari's smirk widened as he understood where this was going, but he kept quiet, waiting for the reveal. Midnight paused, casting a dramatic glance at Kaminari, who raised an eyebrow in response. And for our first place finisher, well, the point value is 10 million. The arena fell silent as everyone stared at her in shock. T10 million? Kaminari stammered, caught off guard for a second. Tetsu's jaw dropped. You've got to be kidding me. Kaminari's worth 10 million points. As the realization sank in, Kaminari looked around to find himself suddenly surrounded by dozens of classmates from various classes, all eyeing him like a prize. So, Shinso from Class C muttered, eyeing Kaminari with a sly grin. All we have to do is take down Kaminari's team, and we're guaranteed first place. Class B, Class C, and even his own classmates from Class A looked at him with predatory glints in their eyes. Midnight smirked as she watched the tension build. That's right, the higher you rank, the bigger target you become. Kaminari, can you handle the pressure? Kaminari sighed internally. Well, this is just great. I knew I'd be a target, but this is next level. He caught sight of his reflection on one of the big screens in the stadium, showing a close-up of his face as he processed the situation. The crowd was still cheering, the spotlight was on him, and for a moment he felt the thrill of it all. Ah, screw it. Kaminari's smirk turned into a grin as he raised his head high, his voice loud and clear for everyone to hear. All right then, he shouted, his tone dripping with confidence. Bring it on. I challenge every single one of you to try and take me down. Kaminari's bold words echoed across the arena, immediately captured by the stadium's cameras and broadcast on every screen, big and small. For a moment, the entire place fell silent. 0_0 winky face. Even Kaminari's parents, watching from the stands, were taken aback. Had he really just taunted everyone else? But only a heartbeat later, the audience erupted in cheers, laughter, and excited chatter. The students around Kaminari weren't nearly as amused. Did you seriously just say that, Kaminari? One contestant shouted, eyes blazing. Oh, you're going to regret this, muttered another, rolling their sleeves up. You're living in a dream, man, someone else growled. As the hostility built around him, Tetsu, Kyoka, and Momo instinctively closed ranks, standing firm at Kaminari's side. Heh, thunderbolt idiot, Bakugo muttered to himself, though a rare grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. For some reason, he found Kaminari's words oddly satisfying. Guess that's what makes you my rival. Meanwhile, Todoroki merely glanced over, his expression calm but slightly intrigued. Kaminari's confidence wasn't surprising to him. After all, he had a similar belief in his own abilities. He wouldn't have voiced it so bluntly, but he could respect it. Midoriya, on the other hand, shifted nervously. Maybe Kaminari went a bit too far, he murmured, already worried about what his classmate had gotten himself into. He couldn't imagine facing that much pressure himself. Nearby, Kaminari caught Momo and Kyoka exchanging glances, both looking mildly exasperated. Well, you've done it now, Momo said with a sigh. Kaminari just gave her a playful shrug, though his smile had a hint of nervousness. Might as well make things interesting, right? The final rules were announced by midnight, who then gave everyone 15 minutes to form their teams. Kaminari quickly took stock of the situation and grinned as he looked at the 3 people who had stuck by him. Well, it looks like you're the only ones willing to team up with me, he said, half joking. Momo crossed her arms, giving him a mock glare. I wonder why. Kyoka just sighed. Yeah, Kaminari, you really brought this on yourself. Ignoring the gentle scolding, Kaminari nodded toward Tetsu. All right, Tetsu, you're on front defense. Leave it to me. Tetsu grinned, cracking his knuckles. With my quirk, we'll be unbreakable. Meanwhile, across the field, Kirishima was having a similar conversation with Bakugo. Both steel quirk users caught sight of each other, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with competitive energy. I'll be the toughest horse out there, Tetsu declared proudly. Not if I get there first. Kirishima shot back, just as determined. Kaminari, Kyoka, and Momo exchanged helpless glances at the two boys' rivalry. But Kaminari had a plan in mind and led his group over to the sidelines. Where are we going? Yaoyorozu asked, curious. Kaminari gave her a sheepish grin. I'm running low on power after the last round, so I need a quick recharge. If I don't do it now, we'll be at a huge disadvantage. Kyoka raised an eyebrow. They're actually letting you recharge here? Kaminari grinned, shrugging. Well, might as well ask, right? He managed to get permission from Midnight, who pointed him toward a charging station set up for situations like this. Seeing this, Tetsu suddenly had an idea of his own. Hey, can I get some iron to munch on? He asked, hopeful. Midnight raised a brow, looking mildly exasperated. Iron to eat? Tetsu nodded, explaining. It's for my quirk. It keeps my strength up. After a quick call for confirmation, Midnight allowed it, and Tetsu received a few metal plates to chew on. Soon, the four of them were gathered on the sidelines. Kaminari recharging, Tetsu snacking on iron, and Kyoka and Momo watching with a mix of amusement and resignation. All right, let's go over the plan, Kaminari said seriously, his hands gripping the charging station as sparks danced around him. Tetsu, you'll be our front shield, he instructed, nodding toward the steel user. Got it, Tetsu replied confidently. I'll make sure nothing breaks through. Turning to Kyoka, Kaminari continued. Kyoka, you'll cover our right side. Use your quirk to destroy the ground if anyone gets too close. Understood, Kyoka said, recalling how effective that tactic had been during the entrance exam. And Momo, Kaminari said, giving her a nod. You'll cover the left. I'll need you to make 100 steel balls for me fast. We might need to use the lightning chain technique again. Momo smiled, giving him a determined nod. You've got it. We'll be ready. With everyone clear on their roles, the group quickly got into formation. Before long, Midnight called everyone back to the starting line, signaling the end of their prep time. All contestants, take your positions. On the massive screens around the arena, each team was highlighted, introducing the lineups to the roaring crowd. Team 1, Kaminari Denki, Tetsu, Yaoyorozu Momo, Jiro Kyoka. Team 2, Midoriya Izuku, Tokoyami Fumikage, Uraraka Ochiko, Hatsume. Team 3, Todoroki Shoto, Ida Tenya, Ojiro Mashireo, Kota Koji. Team 4, Bakugo Katsuki, Kirishima Ijiro, Siro Hanta, Ashido Mina. Team 5, Shoji Mizo, Azuri Tsuyu, Mineta Minoru. Team 6, Shinso Hitoshi, Shiozaki Ibara, Koziai Tsuburaba, Bondo Kojiro. Team 7, Hananuki Juzo, Hagakure Toru, Sato Rikido. Team 8, Setsuna Tokage, Yanagi Reiko, Komori Kinoko, Shishida Jirota. Team 9, Minoma Nito, Kaibara-san, Korwaro Shurhai, Shota Nairenjiki. Team 10, Manga Fukudashi, Hiryu Rin, Yui Kodai. Team 11, Pony Tsunatori, Taguru Kamakiri. Team 12, Aoyama Yuga, Awaze Yosetsu. As the final teams assembled, Present mixed voice echoed across the stadium, hyping up the audience one last time. All right, let's get ready for this brutal cavalry battle. He began the countdown, and the crowd joined in, their voices thundering in unison. 3, 2, 1. With a crack of Midnight's whip, she shouted, "Begin! Charge! Get him!" Bakugo, perched on Kirishima's shoulders, roared as he charged towards Kaminari's team. Almost every other group on the field had the same idea, zeroing in on the team holding that coveted 10 million point headband. "I'll make you regret that arrogance, Kaminari." Yeah, it's all about the 10 million points now. Kaminari wasn't surprised by the attention. They'd painted a giant target on themselves the moment he took first place. But he remained unfazed, even grinning at the challenge. "So, what's the plan, Kaminari?" Momo asked, her tone steady despite the incoming chaos. Tetsu and Kyoka were also waiting, ready to react on his command. "We make a break for it." He raised an eyebrow and smirked at the camera that happened to zoom in on him, broadcasting his face across the stadium and to viewers everywhere. But first, Kaminari extended his hands, placing them on Tetsu, Kyoka, and Momo's shoulders. "Time to boost your speed." With a burst of electricity, the three of them were suddenly wrapped in Kaminari's electric charge, crackling energy enhancing their movements. "Let's move." In an instant, the Kaminari team shot across the field, moving in a blur. Their sudden burst of speed left everyone else scrambling to keep up. Don't let them get away. Nearby, Hagakure was shouting instructions from her perch atop Hananuki's shoulders. The Class B student activated his quirk, softening, turning the ground beneath them into a viscous, muddy mess. It was a tactic designed to slow Kaminari's team down, but by the time the effect reached their position, Kaminari and his team had already sped past it. Whoa! The Kaminari team's moving at lightning speed. Present Mick's voice boomed over the speakers. It seems like Kaminari's ability isn't just for himself. He's sharing that speed boost with his teammates. The observation didn't go unnoticed by professional heroes watching the event. Among them was Kamui Woods, who watched with keen interest from the stands, flanked by MT Lady and Death Arms. Impressive. A quirk that can provide support like that is rare, Kamui mused. We could use someone with that kind of utility in our agency. Death Arms nodded. I wonder how many people he can charge up like that. If it's more than 3, his potential goes way beyond just combat. That's Kaminari, right? Midnight Senpai mentioned him. MT Lady chimed in, watching Kaminari's display with admiration. On the field, Kaminari kept his eyes sharp. Kyoka, get ready. Without missing a beat, Kyoka extended her earphone jacks and drove them deep into the ground to their right. On it, the shockwave from Kyoka's quirk tore through the ground, shattering it and creating an impassable terrain for the teams pursuing them. The tremor left Bakugo, Shoji, and other close pursuers struggling to keep their balance, forcing several teams to swerve away to avoid toppling. Nice one, Jiro. Tetsu grinned, thrilled by their teamwork. Feeling pumped now? Kaminari teased, handing a bag of steel balls to Kyoka. Here, this'll give us some extra firepower. Kyoka nodded, securing the steel balls to use for defense. Let's keep moving, Momo said, glancing at the other groups catching up from behind. If we keep up this pace, we'll be hard to catch. But Kaminari's team wasn't the only one with determination. Across the field, Bakugo was growling with frustration, his face twisted in a scowl as he watched Kaminari pulling away. Kaminari, you're not getting away from me, Bakugo roared. But before he could make a move, Monoma from Class B darted by and snagged the headband off Bakugo's head. Too slow, Class A, Monoma sneered, waving Bakugo's points in the air. Get back here, you bastard. Bakugo exploded, both literally and figuratively, propelling himself after Monoma with a series of fiery blasts. Meanwhile, Class B had adopted a surprising strategy. Realizing they couldn't keep up with Kaminari's speed, they decided to target other Class A teams instead, stripping them of their points. In a matter of minutes, the only Class A teams still holding onto their headbands were Kaminari's, Midoriya's, and Todoroki's. On the sidelines, Kaminari observed the field with a smirk. Class B decided to gang up on us, huh? That actually works in our favor. Why's that? Momo asked. It means we're not facing everyone at once. We can focus on just a few groups at a time. As if on cue, Minetta's team charged toward them. Minetta's face set with grim determination as he held a handful of his sticky grape balls. This is it. With the other teams occupied, we can just go for Kaminari. At the same time, Todoroki's team was maneuvering to cut them off at the edge of the field. Todoroki, riding atop Ida's shoulders, had been watching Kaminari carefully, waiting for the right moment to intercept. You've been circling the edge to avoid confrontation, Todoroki observed, but there's only so much space. You can't run forever. Ida nodded in agreement. And with my engine quirk, we won't lose in a straight race. Kaminari grinned at the sight of his opponent. Well, Todoroki, I guess you finally caught up. But despite the growing pressure, Kaminari didn't flinch. Instead, he looked over his shoulder at the camera focused on him and, in true showman fashion, flashed a confident smile. You might be fast, Ida, but you'll have to catch us first. The timer on the scoreboard continued to count down, but Kaminari and his team kept moving, their high-speed movements creating a whirlwind on the field. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, their cheers growing louder with each second. Will Kaminari's team hold on to their 10 million points? Present Mick's excited commentary filled the air. Or will Todoroki, Bakugo, or one of Class B's dark horses manage to turn the tables? Less than 5 minutes left. Time to go all out. With that declaration, Todoroki launched himself off Ida's shoulders. As he descended, a fierce burst of icy wind erupted from his right foot, creating a towering icicle beneath him. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Present Mike shouted into his microphone, his voice echoing across the stadium. He's left his horse. Is that allowed? Midnight, watching from her station, hesitated before responding. According to the rules, as long as he doesn't touch the ground and maintains some contact with his team, it's allowed. Hearing this, Bakugo smirked from across the field. If that's how it works, then fine by me. Without a second thought, Bakugo leapt off Kirishima's shoulders, launching himself forward with explosive blasts from his palms. He tore through the air, eyes locked on Monoma, who had stolen his headband moments ago. With a savage grin, Bakugo snatched it back from Monoma's neck in one swift motion. Get lost, side characters. Bakugo sneered, glancing around at the dazed Monoma team before turning his eyes towards Kaminari, who was encircled by an imposing wall of ice Todoroki had erected around him. Next up, it's you, Kaminari. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the field, Midoriya's team was busy securing their own points. Tokoyami's dark shadow stood at attention, keeping a lookout. Midoriya, our score's looking solid. What's the plan? Midoriya adjusted the headband he'd just snagged from another Class B team. Let's play it safe. With Hatsum's gear, we've got a height advantage. Let's stay airborne and defend what we have. But inside the ice wall surrounding Kaminari's team, something unexpected was brewing. A sudden, blinding golden light shone from within, piercing through the ice and filling the stadium with a brilliant glow. A minute earlier, there are less than 5 minutes left, Todoroki muttered, perched on top of his icicle. It's time to end this. With that, he unleashed a wave of icy spikes, directing them at Kaminari's team to immobilize Tetsu, Kyoka, and Momo. His intention was clear: to trap them, making it impossible for them to escape. Go for both teams. Take all their points. Mineta yelled, hurling his sticky purple balls from another direction, while Ajui's tongue whipped out, aiming to snatch the headband from Kaminari's neck. At the same time, Tsunatori from Class B, riding on her teammate's shoulders, lowered her head. The tips of her horns glowed before she fired 2 energy blasts from them, targeting the left and right sides of Kaminari's team to box them in. Seeing the incoming onslaught, Kyoka turned to Kaminari, her voice tense. Kaminari, we're surrounded. Kaminari's eyes narrowed with determination. Leave it to me. In one fluid motion, he grabbed a handful of steel balls crafted earlier by Momo and sent a weak electric charge through each of them. Then he tossed them out in a wide arc. As they hovered in midair, he held out his hands, letting golden electricity surge between his palms and the steel balls, forming an intricate web of electrified lines around them. Within seconds, Kaminari's lightning chain had transformed into a defensive net. Hundreds of electric lines crisscrossed in front of them, intercepting Todoroki's icy spikes, Mineta's sticky balls, and Tsunatori's energy blasts. The attacks hit the electric web with a series of loud clashes, generating flashes of light and bursts of steam as the cold met Kaminari's intense heat. Perfect, Kaminari thought to himself as he maintained the current flowing through his hands. Turns out I only need to power this lightning chain through my hands instead of my whole body. This works way better. Suddenly, a scream echoed from nearby. Ah! Ajui cried out in pain as her extended tongue touched Kaminari's electrified web, sending a shock straight through her. The electric current traveled down to Mineta and Shoji, who were part of her team, and they all dropped to the ground from the shock. In the stands, Present Mike was quick to react. Oh no! Shoji's team has taken a direct shock. Is Kaminari's team going to get disqualified? But Midnight quickly reviewed the replay and shook her head. Nope, Kaminari didn't attack them directly. Ajui's tongue accidentally made contact with his electric field while she was trying to grab their points. The shock was an unintended consequence of their own actions. She raised her whip, making the call official. Shoji's team is disqualified for landing on the ground, but Kaminari's team is still in play. The crowd gasped, the tension palpable. Kaminari's defensive technique had not only held strong, but it had also inadvertently taken out an entire team without breaking any rules. He's using those steel balls with an electric field. That's a clever application, Aizawa murmured from the announcer's booth, his eyes fixed on Kaminari's handiwork. This lightning chain. It's versatile. It works defensively and offensively, can be used alone or in a group. That kid's got serious potential. Present Mike nodded enthusiastically. Wow, that's got to be a signature move, right? But Aizawa's keen eyes noticed something else happening on the field. Kaminari was shifting the steel balls around, each one moving in a controlled orbit around him, their paths guided by his electromagnetic field. The currents connecting them began to rotate, creating a vortex of crackling electricity. The currents intertwined, forming a spinning wall of lightning that encircled Kaminari's team, shielding them from all angles. The sheer energy radiating from the vortex was enough to keep even Todoroki at bay, who had momentarily retreated with Ida. From the stands, All Might watched Kaminari with wide eyes. Could it be? Has he already developed a technique of this level? Kaminari's lightning chain was now a defensive barrier, but as he increased the speed of the rotation, he turned it into something far more formidable. Aizawa's narrowed his eyes, his normally stoic face betraying a flicker of awe. He's manipulating the electricity so precisely. That's beyond anything I've seen from him so far. Not only the students, but All Might and several other teachers on the hero side of the faculty bench stood up instinctively, their faces showing shock. In the back of the auditorium, Endeavor leaned against the wall, watching the fight with a focused intensity. His cold blue eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. The source of their astonishment was the electric field rapidly spinning clockwise around Kaminari's team at high speed. No, that's not quite right. This was no longer just a field or even a lightning chain. It looked more like an inverted golden dome-shaped current shield touching the ground. A defensive barrier made of lightning? Midnight murmured from her spot on the sidelines, as bewildered as anyone else. Just as I thought. On the battlefield, Kaminari sat atop Tetsu, his golden eyes half closed as he focused intently on the steel balls spinning faster and faster under his control. The previous times he'd used this lightning chain technique, it had been rushed. He hadn't had a chance to really feel the changes in his control. But this time was different. Having attempted it twice already, he now had a better sense of what he was doing. With practice, the technique was becoming smoother. Practice really does make perfect. This time, while maintaining the lightning chain, he'd felt a strange sensation, as if he could influence the steel balls with both his current and his mind. Following that instinct, he had tentatively tested it, and the steel ball he focused on had actually moved. If he could control one, could he control all of them? Before long, all of the steel balls moved in sync, causing Momo and the others to watch in concern. They knew that if something went wrong with Kaminari's move, they'd all be in serious trouble. But the situation was unfolding beyond anyone's expectations. Once Kaminari realized he could control the steel balls and grew more confident in his abilities, his mind began racing with possibilities. If I can manipulate steel balls with my electric field, could I make a steel plate and fly on it? The thought flashed through his mind, a memory from the first obstacle course still fresh. He'd struggled with not being able to fly back then, and it had clearly stuck with him. Naturally, the idea of soaring through the air was appealing. He even had a mental image of an imposing, helmeted man with white hair, standing proudly, appearing before him. If I keep improving this skill, maybe I could do something like Magneto. The image faded, replaced by a young girl with short brown hair and a confident look. Or perhaps I could study moves like the iron sand techniques that Electric Princess uses. But those were goals for another day. Right now, his priority was defense, especially since the rules prevented him from taking the initiative to attack. Just then, another figure surfaced in his mind, a stoic boy with dark hair and piercing white eyes, as an idea sparked. Rotation defense. Just like Hakshikaten, his vision was clear. To use 100 steel balls, spinning in a circular motion around him like a top, creating a powerful centrifugal force to deflect any incoming attacks. Compared to his previous lightning chain, this technique offered several distinct advantages. First, it consumed far less energy. This move relied mostly on centrifugal force for defense, so he didn't need to increase his electric output, just keep a low-level current going. Second, it provided much better coverage. The lightning chain created a mesh of linear currents that inevitably left some gaps. But now, by forming a continuous barrier, he'd eliminated those weaknesses. Finally, this new move boasted far stronger defensive power. The lightning chain had always been more offensive in nature. Although he could use it for defense, it was nowhere near as specialized as this full-on defensive shield. Yeah, this is my absolute defense, Kaminari declared confidently to everyone around him. Thunder Aegis. Boom. Behind him, the ice wall shielding Todoroki's team suddenly shattered. Bakugo, Kirishima, and the others surged through the gap and froze, eyes widening as they caught sight of the golden light source. "What the hell is that?" Bakugo exclaimed in surprise. No one answered him, though. Todoroki and the others were too focused on the shimmering, inverted golden dome standing between them and Kaminari's team. "Absolute defense," Todoroki murmured, his gaze sharpening as he sneered slightly. "You're as full of yourself as ever, Kaminari." Without another word, he leaped up onto a nearby icicle and activated his ice quirk, creating a cascade of icicles that rained down like an avalanche. If he hadn't been worried about potentially hurting Kaminari and his teammates, he might have gone as far as to summon his largest ice wall and crush them outright. Boom! The collision of dozens of icicles against the radiant thunder aegis filled the stadium with explosive energy, capturing the attention of all 120,000 spectators. And even the groups outside the ice wall couldn't help but look their way. It was clear that the intensity of the clash between Kaminari and Todoroki was on another level entirely. "Hey, isn't this a bit much for just a game?" Present Mike shouted into his microphone, his voice filled with shock. All the stadium screens zoomed in on Kaminari's location, though the cameras struggled to capture a clear image through the thick fog of ice and steam. "Dear, look." Kaminari's mother clutched his father's arm tightly, her face filled with worry. "Is our son going to be all right?" Kaminari's father remained silent, his heart racing with anxiety. Even though Kaminari had declared that he had an absolute defense, Todoroki's attacks looked overwhelming. "He'll be fine, I'm sure of it," he finally said, trying to reassure her. "We have to trust him." As the steam gradually dispersed under the bright sunlight, a familiar golden glow emerged from within, shining even more brilliantly than before. Relief washed over Kaminari's parents, their worry replaced by pride and joy as they saw their son's defenses holding strong. How is that possible?" Todoroki, still standing atop the icicle, could no longer maintain his stoic expression. He stared in disbelief at the golden dome, which continued to spin calmly among the remnants of his shattered ice. Even though he hadn't used his full ice wall move, he'd still put all his strength into the attack. Yet Kaminari's absolute defense had blocked it with ease. "Incredible." Aizawa, pressed up against the glass of the observation deck, murmured in amazement. He watched Kaminari's thunder aegis with an intensity that made him look almost like a mummy lost in awe. To turn something as wild and volatile as lightning into something so controlled and disciplined. His creativity is remarkable, but the precision in his control of electromagnetic forces is equally impressive. As a pro hero who values technique and skill, Aizawa was more sensitive to such subtleties than most. 3 minutes left. Midnight called, her voice echoing through the arena. Absolute defense. Bakugo looked at the thunder aegis in front of him with surprise, then sneered with a mocking grin. "Seriously? Didn't think of flashy. Wanna be like you would be talking big. What a joke." Kaminari just shrugged, still smiling. "Less talking, more doing. If you think you can break it, go ahead." "Oh, I'll do more than that," Bakugo growled, his face twisting into a fierce scowl. "I'm blowing this stupid shield of yours to bits." With a vicious glint in his eyes, Bakugo extended his right hand toward the thunder aegis. He was smart enough not to make direct contact, keeping a safe distance of about a meter, before activating his quirk with full force. Boom! The explosion erupted, sending fire and black smoke surging toward the thunder aegis in an intense wave. Bakugo watched eagerly, fully expecting his blast to leave some kind of dent. But as the smoke cleared, the golden shield remained unscathed, its light undiminished. Bakugo's expression faltered, disbelief filling his face. No way. He stared, stunned, at the unblemished shield in front of him. "Setting off fireworks for the crowd, are we?" Kaminari chuckled. His calm demeanor only served to make Todoroki and the others feel like he was taunting them. "Go on, give it all you've got. Let's see what you can do." In truth, Kaminari was also curious about the limits of his thunder aegis, and he couldn't help but want to test it further. "You arrogant lightning freak." Bakugo snapped back, seething. He glanced at his classmates and barked. "Back up. Unless you want to get blown away. Don't blame me for not warning you." "Bakugo, what are you planning?" Kirishima asked, concerned. "Quit the questions and just move back." Bakugo gave Kirishima a light shove, then turned to Siro. "Be ready to pull me back when I give the signal. Got it?" Yeah, sure." Siro stammered, nodding as he processed Bakugo's request. Meanwhile, Todoroki stood on his ice pillar, conflicted. He considered using his strongest iceberg attack, but hesitated, worried about causing serious harm to Kaminari's team. The last thing he wanted was to be disqualified. Fine, let that guy give it a shot first, Todoroki thought, eyeing Bakugo, who was clearly preparing something big. Bakugo, crouched on Kirishima's back, glared daggers at Kaminari within the golden barrier. Lightning idiot. Watch as I break through your little bubble. Boom. With a fierce leap off Kirishima's back, Bakugo propelled himself high into the air. Using explosions from his palms, he rocketed toward the Thunder Aegis like a missile. Sure, this is going to strain my arms, but Bakugo gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing with determination. I'm sick of that smug grin of yours. Take this, he roared, his hands coming together in a powerful stance as he reached the shield. Howitzer impact. With every ounce of strength he had, Bakugo unleashed a massive explosion, his quirk roaring to its absolute limit. The resulting blast was so intense that even the spectators on the far side of the stadium could feel its heat. Thick black smoke flooded the screens, obscuring everything from view. The shockwave forced everyone back. Kirishima and Shiro were thrown off balance, and Todoroki, standing on his ice pillar, nearly toppled over, barely catching the edge to steady himself. The powerful wind whipped around him, making his clothes and hair flutter wildly. What a massive explosion! I didn't realize he could push his quirk this far. I hope no one got hurt. Cementos, who was supposed to oversee the match as a referee, had silently joined Midnight on the sidelines. His face mirrored her concern. That was intense, Midnight muttered, clutching her whip tightly. We didn't anticipate this level of combat so early in the tournament. Yeah, Cementos agreed, his voice heavy. If any of the students are seriously injured, it'll mean we failed in our responsibilities as pro heroes. In the moment of chaos, there had been no time to intervene. It took nearly a full minute for the thick smoke to clear, finally revealing the scene within. As the haze lifted, the steady, golden light of the Thunder Aegis came into view once more. This can't be happening. Bakugo, who had been yanked back by Shiro's tape just in time, sat perched on Kirishima's back, staring in disbelief. The Thunder Aegis continued to spin in place, completely unaffected. Are you kidding me? That was my strongest attack. Bakugo's arms were sore, throbbing from the strain. But more than that, his confidence had taken a hit. If my max power didn't even scratch this thing, does that mean that lightning idiot is actually stronger than me? As the realization hit, Bakugo's face darkened. Wow, it's holding up even better than I thought, Kaminari murmured, glancing at the stunned expressions of his opponents outside the shield. I really didn't expect this lightning-based, rotating shield to be so durable. Wait, Kaminari suddenly noticed something odd. Tiny cracks were beginning to form on the steel balls that served as the core nodes of his Thunder Aegis. So Bakugo's attack did have an effect after all. If he had hit me with that same blast a second time, this shield probably would have shattered. Kaminari took note of this weakness. He knew he would have to find a way to strengthen the shield's durability, perhaps by eventually moving beyond the steel balls and manipulating pure electric current alone. He clenched his fist, looking at the golden current dancing around his hand. He made a mental note to push his technique further in the future. One day, this move will be a true Thunder Aegis, a real absolute defense. Just then, the roar of the audience broke his train of thought. The 120,000 spectators who had witnessed the clash erupted into cheers, their excitement spilling over. Did you see that? Did you see it? Man, these first years are something else. Is this what it's like to face off against villains already? Yeah, we haven't seen this kind of strength in a first-year class in years. On screen, Todoroki stood on a high ice pillar, his expression cold and resolute. All right, Kaminari, he muttered. I won't hold back. With a surge of power, a massive wave of ice exploded from Todoroki, creating a towering iceberg that surged forward like an unstoppable force. Stop! Cementos, the teacher responsible for overseeing the match, reacted immediately. He slammed his hands onto the ground, activating his quirk. Thick cement walls rose up one after another between Todoroki's iceberg and Kaminari's Thunder Aegis. In his rush, he created nearly 10 stacked barriers to absorb the impact. Whoa, that's the power of a pro hero, one student murmured, awed by Cementas's quick thinking and strength. On the big screen, viewers could only watch as Todoroki's ice crashed through wall after wall, advancing relentlessly toward the Golden Thunder Aegis. But then, as the ice met the electrified shield, the clash of extreme cold and intense heat produced a massive cloud of steam, engulfing the entire stadium in thick white mist. It's so cold. What a spectacle! Hundreds of thousands of spectators, along with the heroes in the stands, rose to their feet, trying to see through the fog that now filled the stadium. The whole scene looked like something out of a dream or a fairy tale landscape. These three, they're all first years? That's insane. I don't think even many third years could pull off moves like that. While the audience held their breath, the timer on the big screen continued to count down. Finally, when it hit midnight, the screen displayed two bold letters. Time up, but Present Mike, who was supposed to announce the results, was unusually silent. Like everyone else, he was staring into the fog, eagerly awaiting a glimpse of the aftermath. What happened? Did the Thunder Aegis hold up? All around the world, viewers watching on TV or online shared the same thought. Kaminari's parents sat forward in their seats, anxiety etched across their faces. Todoroki's iceberg had been so massive that even those outside the stadium could see its peak rising above the walls. As the minutes ticked by, the fog slowly started to dissipate, but the scene within was still unclear. Impatience spread through the crowd, and someone shouted, "Can't Cementas do something to clear the mist?" "Yeah, who won? We want to know." Just as the tension hit its peak, a gentle breeze seemed to arrive from nowhere, swirling through the stadium and helping to clear the lingering mist. When visibility returned, the entire audience gasped at what they saw. On the screen, the Golden Thunder Aegis was gone. In its place lay fragments of metal scattered around Kaminari, Tetsu, Momo, and Kyoka. Surrounding them on all sides were towering walls of ice, still radiating an intense chill even under the hot summer sun. From above, the scene looked like a perfect circle, a small valley of safety amidst Todoroki's frozen wasteland. "That was close," Kaminari muttered, climbing down from Tetsu's shoulders. He glanced around, taking in the near-disastrous scene. Then he looked toward Todoroki, who stood in the distance, eyes wide with surprise. If Cementas hadn't put up those walls to absorb some of the impact, we might have been seriously hurt. Whoa! A deafening roar rose from the crowd, the combined cheers of 120,000 spectators echoing through the stadium. The overwhelming noise momentarily stunned Kaminari, Todoroki, Bakugo, and the others, leaving them with the odd sensation of being almost deafened. Finally, Present Mike regained his composure, grabbed his mic, and let out an excited shout. "Everybody, did you see that? Kaminari's Thunder Aegis withstood Todoroki's iceberg attack. He wasn't kidding. That move really is an absolute defense. Not even some pro heroes could break it head-on." The crowd erupted into even louder cheers. Coming from a veteran hero like Present Mike, his endorsement of the Thunder Aegis left an impact on both the audience and the professionals watching. In the stands, pro heroes from across Japan exchanged looks, nodding in agreement. None of them spoke up to disagree. They all knew the truth of what they had witnessed. A few of the pros, already making mental notes, began to speak excitedly among themselves. "We need to get him to intern with us. When he graduates, we're offering him a job, no question about it." They recognized the value of Kaminari's unique skill set. Not only could he bolster his team with support, but he also had an incredibly resilient defense. In the hero world, that kind of versatility was rare and highly prized. Meanwhile, inside the stadium, Momo was still processing everything that had happened. She turned to Kaminari, a bit dazed. "We won. Just like that." Kyoka nodded, sharing her bewilderment. "It feels like we didn't even have to do much." "Yeah," Tetsu grumbled with a laugh. "I didn't even get to show off my steel warhorse durability. I just stood there like a statue." Kaminari glanced at them, shaking his head with a small smile. "Hey, a win's a win, right?" But in his mind, he thought to himself, was it really that easy? We almost didn't make it out of that. As the crowd's cheers continued, Present Mic's voice rang out once more, announcing the final results. And now the top 4 teams. In first place, Team Kaminari. Kaminari Denki has delivered on his promise. Flawless performance. Second place goes to Team Bakugo. Damn it. Bakugo, who had been sitting on the ground, pounded his fists against the floor in frustration. looking like he'd just lost a championship rather than placed second. Behind him, Kirishima, Shiro, and Ishido exchanged helpless glances. Third place, Team Todoroki. Todoroki stared silently at Kaminari from across the arena, his expression unreadable. His left side, where his quirk produced heat, began to melt the frost still clinging to his right. In the stands, Endeavor watched his son with a hard expression, his displeasure clear. And in fourth place, Team Shinso. Wait, when did they make it in? Present Mike asked, sounding genuinely confused. In the crowd, Shinso, a student from the General Studies department, just gave a quiet, confident smile. While Kaminari and the others had dominated the spotlight, Shinso had quietly been making moves of his own. Phew, we did it. Midoriya sighed in relief, jumping off Tokoyami's shoulders. He celebrated with Uraraka and their teammates. Even if they hadn't reached the top 4, they had done well. And that was something to be proud of. And now, folks, we'll be taking an hour-long lunch break. Get ready, because this afternoon, it's time for the final showdown. As the announcer's voice faded, Mike turned to his partner, Aizawa, who had just settled back into his seat with his usual sleepy look. Hey, Eraserhead, wanna grab a bite together? Aizawa simply muttered, sleep. With present Mick's announcement, the audience began to leave the stadium in a lively, excited commotion. Ordinary spectators exited through the guest entrances, talking animatedly about the thrilling events they'd just witnessed. Outside, the food stalls bustled with activity as vendors scrambled to serve the wave of hungry attendees. Inside, the participants headed through a separate entrance, making their way to the UA cafeteria for lunch. To encourage student participation in the sports festival, UA had promised free meals for all contestants on the day of the event. Man, I'm starving. Tetsu clutched his stomach as he walked along with the crowd. I was so focused on the competition that I didn't notice, but now I feel like I've burned through everything I ate this morning. Kaminari laughed and clapped Tetsu on the shoulder. You really did work hard today. Not only did you run a few kilometers in the first event, but you also carried me all over the place. After a moment of thought, Kaminari made a generous gesture to Tetsu, Kyoka, and Momo. Tell you what, lunch is on me today. Order whatever you like. Don't hold back. Really? That's awesome. Tetsu cheered, clearly thrilled. This is the first time you're treating me. That's not true, Kaminari retorted with a grin. Didn't I treat you to pork cutlet rice once before? Soon, Kaminari and his fellow Class 1A students gathered in one area of the cafeteria, food trays in hand, and started chatting away. They had a lot to talk about after everything that had happened. At that moment, Momo, who had just taken a bite of bread, looked at Kaminari and asked him a rather unexpected question. Kaminari, have you decided on my band mascot yet? Kaminari, in the middle of scooping up a piece of tofu, paused in surprise. He quickly regained his composure and chuckled. Wow, you're really invested in this, huh? Of course, Momo replied earnestly. She glanced at Kyoka, then continued, since I'm part of the Pikachu band now, I can't be the only one without a mascot. You and Kyoka already have yours, so why shouldn't I get one too? So, have you figured it out? She fixed him with an expectant look. And don't try to dodge the question. If you don't have an answer, I might just stop teaching you about electromagnetism. Kaminari burst into laughter. Seeing Momo, usually so composed, act so eager was both amusing and refreshing. He finally put down his spoon and raised his right hand in front of him. I've already thought of something for you, actually. And I think it fits your vibe perfectly. Zap! Zap! In the next moment, a soft glow of golden electricity sparked in Kaminari's palm. The current was delicate and controlled, not chaotic at all. Gradually, the electric light formed into the shape of a small, elegant creature, shimmering with a warm, golden glow. So pretty. Mina, Achiko, Tsuyu, and the other girls looked at it in awe. Whoa, Kaminari, can you really do that? Midoriya was equally astonished. If you can create three-dimensional shapes with electricity, does that mean you could also form maps or layouts? That could be super useful during hero missions. Leave it to Midoriya to immediately start analyzing the potential applications, Kaminari thought with a smile. They really did think alike sometimes. Kaminari, what's her name? Momo asked, her eyes fixed on the glowing creature. Kyoka was also curious. Although she liked her own mascot, she couldn't help but notice that Momo's looked classier. She couldn't shake the slight pang of jealousy. This one's called Nine Tails, Kaminari explained, gesturing to the elegantly shaped creature in his hand. It's the evolved form of Vulpix and is a fire-type Pokemon. It has these ruby-like eyes that can cast a strange light to control minds, and its flames are incredibly powerful. It can use moves like Flamethrower, Explosion, and Overheat. He then raised his left hand, forming a smaller, cuter version of the creature, a Vulpix. This is Vulpix, its earlier form, he added. As Momo listened to his explanation, her eyes sparkled with excitement. The more she looked at Ninetales, the more she adored it. There was a graceful, noble air about the creature that resonated with her deeply. If I were to turn into a Pokemon, maybe this is what I'd look like, Momo thought with a soft smile. Meanwhile, Kyoka couldn't resist asking, why is it a fire type though? That doesn't really match Momo's quirk. Well, Kaminari shrugged with a sheepish grin. There aren't any Pokemon with a creation ability like Momo's, so I had to pick one that matched her personality instead. It's perfect. I love it. Momo beamed. When will the merchandise be out? I want to fill my room with it. Kaminari chuckled. Well, normally it'd be a while before Ninetales shows up in the show, but we can always have some special merchandise made just for you. Momo's smile grew wider. Kaminari's thoughtfulness was clearly appreciated. Seeing this, Mina spoke up. Hey, does that mean we'll get Pokemon mascots too? Remember, we signed the character rights contract. Kaminari looked around at the hopeful faces and laughed. You'll definitely show up in future episodes, but I haven't decided on exclusive mascots for everyone yet. Momo's is just for the band. As he said this, Kaminari's gaze drifted toward Bakugo, who was eating Mapo tofu a few seats away, obviously listening and despite pretending not to care. Kaminari grinned mischievously. Actually, I've got a couple of Pokemon in mind that are a perfect match for Bakugo. Midoriya's eyes lit up with interest. Wait, really? There are Pokemon with Bakugo's temperament. What did you say, Deku? Bakugo's head snapped up, glaring at Midoriya. You got a problem with my personality. Say it again, I dare you. Kirishima and the others exchanged knowing looks, clearly amused by Bakugo's outburst. But they, too, were curious to see which Pokemon Kaminari had picked. Kaminari formed the two creatures in his hands, and immediately everyone's eyes were drawn to their fiery, fierce appearances. These Pokemon looked intense, just like Bakugo. These are? Kyoka asked, eyeing the glowing forms with a mix of fascination and unease. Kaminari grinned. Infernape and Magmar. The lunch break wasn't long, just about an hour. Enough time for everyone to grab a bite and chat a bit. During this time, Kaminari took the opportunity to slip away to the bathroom and call his parents outside the venue. His parents sounded overjoyed on the phone, clearly ecstatic about his performance that morning. Kaminari couldn't blame them. Today had been a big win. He could already imagine how lively his fan page on MTV Japan must be, with his follower count probably shooting up. Meanwhile, Minoru Mineta had earned a new nickname among the class, the Incarnation of Lust. He'd just told Momo and the other girls, with an absurdly serious expression, that there was a message from a substitute teacher instructing them to dress like cheerleaders and compete in a cheerleading event. Of course, Kaminari immediately knew it was nonsense. With Aizawa-sensei's personality, if there had really been an official notice from the school, he would have mentioned it directly or even come in person. He'd never rely on a student to pass on such a message. But Kaminari chose not to expose Mineta's lie. It was rare to see the girls all dressed up in cheerleading uniforms, after all. So why not enjoy the sight? Before long, all the contestants gathered back in the stadium, and the audience filled up the stands once more. All right, lunch break is over, and it's time to announce the final event. Present Mike, the commentator, sounded even more enthusiastic than in the morning, probably because he'd had a good meal and some rest. But before that, I have good news for everyone who didn't make it to the finals, he continued with a big grin. Since this is a sports festival, the school has prepared some fun activities that everyone can join. And we've even invited a professional cheerleading team from the United States to get everyone hyped. Isn't that exciting? However, as soon as he said this, both Mike and Aizawa-sensei noticed something odd about Class A's girls. What's going on with Class A? Is this some kind of fan service? Mixed words echoed across the stadium as the camera zoomed in on Momo, Kyoka, and the other girls from Class A, who were now wearing cute, youthful cheerleading outfits, but looked less than thrilled. Well, needless to say, they managed to attract more attention than the professional cheerleaders. Not bad at all. Looks good, Kaminari said with a grin, openly admiring the girls' outfits. Meanwhile, most of the other boys in Class A looked away awkwardly, too embarrassed to stare. Yes, Mineta, the mastermind behind the scene, looked completely smug. Ah, I am a genius. Mineta-kun, you totally lied to us, didn't you? Momo glared at him, her face flushed with embarrassment. Kyoka, equally red-faced, threw down her pom-poms in frustration. Little did she know that her outfit had already captured the attention of some far-off fans who were planning to record it for their own memories. I've got to get the video footage of this later and make it my desktop background, a fan muttered from the audience. At this point, Mike decided it was time to move on. Due to the limited time, he quickly resumed his role as MC, and the 4 giant screens switched to display a pyramid-shaped tournament bracket. After the entertainment events, we'll start the one-on-one elimination round, with the 20 students who advanced in the previous events. Mike continued, since we have an odd number of competitors, 2 people will have to compete in an extra round to keep the brackets even. They'll have an extra match before moving to the next round. Isn't that unfair to those 2? Uraraka asked with a frown. Midnight Sensei, who was overseeing the event, addressed the question through her mic. It may seem unfair, yes, but as aspiring heroes, we want to teach you all an important lesson. In life, unexpected challenges and unfair situations are bound to happen. Facing these calmly is an essential quality for any pro hero. In other words, there wasn't really a fairer way to handle it, so they had to deal with it as best they could. UA rules. All right, let's start with the Kaminari group, who placed first to draw lots and decide the matchups, Midnight announced, smiling warmly at the students. But just as the first group prepared to draw, Ojiro and Koda from Class A both raised their hands. Sorry to interrupt, they said in unison, glancing at each other with surprise. I want to withdraw, Ojiro said firmly. There was a collective gasp from the students. Midnight herself looked stunned, clearly not expecting this. Why, Ojiro? Midoriya called out in disbelief. You worked so hard to make it this far. Yeah, you know how rare this opportunity is, don't you? Toru Hagakure added, her invisible hands waving in distress. Ojiro clenched his fists. It's because I don't remember anything from the cavalry battle. I think that guy's quirk must have affected me somehow. He glanced briefly at Hitoshi Shinso, who looked straight ahead, unfazed. I know how valuable this opportunity is, and I know it might seem foolish to give it up. But I can't, in good conscience, take a spot in the finals when I didn't earn it through my own efforts. Hearing this, Kaminari felt a newfound respect for Ojiro. While the girls around tried to comfort Ojiro, he covered his face, his voice trembling with emotion. No, this is about my pride. I just can't accept it. Koda stepped forward, scratching his head in embarrassment. As for me, I don't think I'm suited for one-on-one battles in this kind of setting. My quirk, it's called Oni voice. I can control animals, but... He glanced around the noisy stadium. There are no animals here. Even pigeons and birds stay away from such a loud environment. Midnight gave him a sympathetic smile. All right, Koda, I understand. Then, one of the Class B students, Shota, also stepped forward. I'd like to withdraw as well. My reasons are the same as Ojiro's from Class A, letting someone who hasn't done anything meaningful advance. Just doesn't sit right with me. The crowd grew quiet, watching the 3 of them. Their decision might have seemed unusual, but in a way, it showcased a heroic spirit that was admirable. Professional heroes who valued integrity and character would surely take notice of their actions. Kaminari, observing from his spot, thought to himself, these guys, they've definitely got the right kind of resolve. Midnight glanced at them with a look of approval. All right, I respect your decisions. With a flick of her whip, she granted their requests to withdraw, then added with a hint of mischief. This means we have 3 open spots. So we'll take the next 3 students with the highest total scores from the first 2 events to fill them. As she spoke, the names appeared on the screen. Bone Crusher, Shiozaki, and Tsuburaba from Class B. With the roster set, Midnight continued. And now, let's reveal the matchups for the first round. The large screen displayed the pairings, and the first matchup was set. First match, Achiko Uraraka versus Hitoshi Shinso. Midnight's announcement marked the start of the entertainment events. While those who didn't advance eagerly joined in, the finalists had the option to rest, strategize, or simply prepare for their matches. Everyone had their own thoughts and goals, and before they knew it, it was time for the final round to begin. The rules are simple, Mike explained, his voice carrying across the stadium. If you knock your opponent out of bounds, render them unable to fight, or make them give up, you win. Don't worry about injuries. Recovery Girl is standing by as always. However, he added with a note of caution, if your moves are deemed excessively dangerous, you'll be disqualified on the spot. Kaminari raised an eyebrow at this. That means I'll have to think twice about using that move. It might be too risky for a school event. As he mulled over his options, Uraraka stepped onto the concrete arena, her face showing traces of nervousness. Across from her, Shinso stood with his usual, calm expression. With her father's encouragement fresh in her mind, Uraraka's determination hardened. Dad, I'll show you. I'm going to become a pro hero and help you make a better life. Her fear faded as her goal came into focus. Facing Shinso, her gaze turned resolute. Begin. It all comes down to keeping a clear head. Sitting in the special seating area for Class 1A, Kaminari glanced at Hitoshi Shinso, who wore an indifferent expression down on the field. Turning around, he asked Ojiro, who was sitting just behind him. Did you tell Uraraka about his quirk? Yeah, I did. As soon as Ojiro responded, he noticed Kaminari's calm tone and asked curiously, Wait, you knew about his quirk too? I ran into him a couple of times before, so I knew a little bit. Kaminari nodded and looked back at the arena with a confident smile. If she's aware of his abilities, Uraraka should win without much trouble. But before he finished speaking, his smile froze along with the figure of Ochako Uraraka on the field. What? She knew what to expect. So how did she still get caught? Half a minute earlier, do you think you'll lose? The crowd had fallen quiet, and Shinso broke the silence, his voice laced with subtle condescension. Uraraka furrowed her brow slightly, feeling a bit confused by his question. The Hero Sports Festival is meant to test a person's inner strength, Shinso continued, starting his psychological game. Uraraka might not have realized it, but for him, the match began the moment he opened his mouth. No one who truly wants a future as a hero should care about something as trivial as dignity, Shinso added, his expression showing a hint of disdain. That guy, Ojiro, was it? He was just being foolish, talking about dignity and giving up his chance. Doesn't that sound ridiculous to you? As expected, a flash of anger appeared on Uraraka's face. She was normally a kind, cheerful person, but Shinso's blatant insult towards her classmate sparked something in her. Don't you dare look down on Ojiro-san. In her anger, she forgot everything Ojiro had warned her about earlier. She took a step toward Shinso, ready to defend her friend. But as soon as she spoke, her body suddenly froze. She stood there with a blank look on her face, her movements stopping entirely. Across from her, Shinso's lips curled into a satisfied smirk. Got you. What? How did this happen? I warned her specifically about this. Ojiro was practically pulling his hair out in frustration. Kyoko looked equally worried, biting her lip as she whispered, Oh no, this doesn't look good. Kaminari's smile had disappeared entirely, leaving him staring down at the field with a stoic expression. Unbelievable. He'd thought it was a sure win for Uraraka. If she already knew about Shinso's quirk, she only needed to stay quiet, no matter what he said. Even if she ended up losing, he hadn't expected her to fall for something so simple. What's going on down there? In the announcer's box, Present Mike watched the field in surprise, his voice growing louder in irritation. This is supposed to be the opening match. Get things moving. Meanwhile, on the field, Uraraka was now slowly turning around, walking toward the edge in a trance-like state. The entire audience watched, puzzled by her strange behavior. Uraraka's standing there, completely out of it, and she's walking back to where she started. Could this be Shinso's quirk? Present Mike speculated aloud, stirring up murmurs throughout the crowd. Mind control, That's a pretty powerful ability. A pro hero in the audience, dressed in a suit resembling a dynamic superhero, muttered to himself with a look of awe. Yeah, that kid doesn't stand out much, but he's tougher than he looks, another hero, clad in red and green armor, agreed. The entrance exam really doesn't cater to everyone's strengths, Aizawa muttered from the teacher's area, turning his attention back to his notes with a furrowed brow. With a quirk like his, Shinso never stood a chance at passing the combat-oriented entrance exam. Those robots are immune to mind control. But as Aizawa considered Shinso's options, he felt a hint of understanding. He probably anticipated that and applied to the general studies course as a backup. A smart choice. In the Class 1A seating area, most of the students, except for Kaminari, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Tokoyami were on their feet, shouting encouragement to Uraraka, desperately hoping she'd snap out of it. But it was no use. "She's out," Kaminari muttered, watching as Uraraka crossed the boundary line. For a moment, he felt a pang of disappointment. He'd expected her to stay calm, but clearly, she'd let her emotions get the best of her. Just as Uraraka stepped out of bounds, she blinked, coming back to her senses. But it was already too late. Present Mick's voice filled the stadium as he declared the winner. The first person moving on to the second round is from Class C, Hitoshi Shinso. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Present Mike continued to hype up the victory. Talk about an underdog story. A general studies student, taking down a hero course student with ease. Meanwhile, down on the field, Uraraka's face was a mask of shock and realization. She remembered Ojiro's advice she had completely ignored. She sank to her knees, feeling utterly defeated. I didn't even put up a fight. Uraraka-san. In the audience, Midoriya clenched his fists tightly, clearly heartbroken for her. Her words from before echoed in his mind, reminding him of her motivation. Uraraka-san. Yes. Why do you want to become a hero? Oh, well, honestly, it's for the money. For the money. Yeah, I know it sounds a bit shallow, but my family's been struggling, and I want to become a pro hero so I can earn enough to support them. I want to give my parents a better life. Tears glistened in Midoriya's eyes as he looked down at his friend, devastated on the arena floor. She just wanted to do well. She worked so hard, just to make a difference in her family's life. Hearing this, Kaminari's expression didn't change. He understood Midoriya's emotions, but he knew better than to let himself get caught up in sympathy. This world didn't guarantee success just because someone tried hard. Sometimes good people still lost. This was her fault for letting her emotions cloud her judgment, Kaminari thought, though he kept the opinion to himself. Uraraka, still crying, was escorted off the field, while Shinso walked back to his area to applause. Midoriya, Ashido, and a few other classmates rushed off to comfort her. Kaminari had initially intended to go over as well, but Present Mick's next announcement stopped him in his tracks. The next match is between two of the recommended students, Shoto Todoroki and Jizo Hananuki. Kaminari decided to stay. He was genuinely curious to see if the recommended students, supposedly top-tier talents recognized by Yue, could match Todoroki's strength or Momo's tactical knowledge. Hananuki, let's see what you're made of. Tap, tap, tap. In the corridor connecting the players' lounge to the arena within Yue's gymnasium, Todoroki walked forward with a calm but steely expression. Unlike his classmates, he hadn't watched the previous match between Uraraka and Shinso with the others. Instead, he had spent the time alone in the lounge, quieting the turbulent emotions that had surfaced after witnessing Kaminari's performance. Now he was ready. Just as he turned a corner, his expression turned icy upon noticing the man blocking his way. "Don't stand in my path," he said flatly. It was Endeavor, his father, the current #2 hero in Japan, standing there with an imposing presence. "You're wasting your potential, Shoto," Endeavor replied, his eyes just as cold. In fact, they mirrored Todoroki's own, though in a different way. "In your last match, if you'd used the power of your left side after creating that iceberg, you would have easily overwhelmed Kaminari's Thunder Aegis." Endeavor's voice was filled with scorn, as if he couldn't understand why his son would choose to limit himself. "There's a massive difference in potential between you and someone like him." Todoroki kept walking, choosing not to respond. But as he moved past Endeavor, the older hero spoke sharply. "You need to stop acting like a rebellious child. You have a duty to surpass all might." Watching Todoroki's retreating figure, he continued, "You were born different from your siblings. You're my finest creation." Those words hit a nerve. Todoroki halted just before stepping into the sunlight streaming in from the other side of the corridor. His fists clenched, and he spoke in a low, shaking voice, struggling to contain his anger. "If that's all you have to say, then pay attention." He took a breath. "I'll win this festival without using your power. I'll do it with my mother's strength alone." Endeavor's expression didn't change, though he looked unimpressed. "Even if you manage to scrape by this time, you'll reach your limit soon enough. especially against someone like Kaminari. It's not as easy to freeze electricity. Todoroki took a step forward into the bright sunlight, his face set in determination. Then watch closely. I'll defeat Kaminari without ever touching your fire. With that, he walked away, leaving Endeavor to shake his head slightly, murmuring to himself. Stubborn fool. That boy Kaminari has a far better grasp of his quirk than you do. The next second, any trace of Endeavor's thoughts vanished as cheers from the stadium echoed through the corridor. The arena lit up as the flamethrowers stationed at each corner flared, setting the stage for the next match. Thank you for waiting, everyone. President Mick's voice boomed as he amped up the crowd, more enthusiastic than ever. The last match hadn't exactly been thrilling, but this one had all the signs of a crowd pleaser. Our next match is between these two competitors. The screens around the stadium lit up with photos of Shoto Todoroki and Juzo Hananuki. The audience's excitement reignited as they recognized Todoroki from his previous dominating performances. Here we have two highly talented students who were admitted to UA's hero course by recommendation. This should be an intense showdown. On the field, both Todoroki and Hananuki faced each other without a hint of emotion. Todoroki stood with his usual cold composure, while Hananuki's expression was unreadable, his body language calm and steady. The audience seemed drawn in by their stoic attitudes, as if expecting something special from the elite. Meanwhile, in the Class 1A stands, Kaminari glanced over at Bakugo, who was watching Todoroki intently. Aren't you going to check on Uraraka? Kaminari asked with a hint of curiosity. Bakugo gave him a side eye, then turned back to the arena. I don't care about some crying girl. Besides, he scowled. Deku already went, didn't he? Kaminari chuckled. You really trust Midoriya, huh? Trust? What kind of idiot do you take me for? Bakugo snarled, his voice filled with irritation. Say something like that again, and I'll kill you. Kaminari shrugged, unfazed. By now, he understood Bakugo a bit better. Underneath all that bluster, he wasn't as harsh as he seemed. More than anything, he was just a guy with zero filter. All right, let's get this next match started. President Mike announced, and immediately Hananuki made the first move, stepping forward as he activated his quirk. The cement floor beneath his feet softened visibly, spreading toward Todoroki in a wave. His quirk, softening, allowed him to turn solid ground into a squishy, malleable surface, though it had no effect on living beings. Seeing the darkened, softened ground approaching him, Todoroki's eyes turned sharper. He didn't move from his spot, instead extending his right hand. A massive wall of ice erupted from the floor, surging forward like a tidal wave. Hananuki observed calmly. It's no use. Even if it's ice, I can still soften it. And he was right. When the ice wall made contact with the softened ground, it began to break down, almost melting into a slushy mess. But Todoroki's ice kept coming, layers piling on top of each other faster than Hananuki's quirk could break them down. Within seconds, an enormous iceberg, 50 or 60 meters tall, had formed in the center of the arena. The weight and size of the ice formation caused the stadium to tremble slightly, like a small earthquake. Even the professional heroes in the audience looked on with wary admiration, impressed by Todoroki's control. Yet despite the overwhelming display, Todoroki's face showed no signs of satisfaction. Frost coated the right side of his body from the strain, but his gaze remained locked onto Hananuki, who had been entirely buried beneath the ice. Sorry, Todoroki muttered as he exhaled a cloud of cold air, his eyes distant. There's just too much of a difference in our levels. Up in the stands, Kaminari watched the entire scene unfold with an impassive expression. This guy really doesn't hold back, huh? He muttered to himself, impressed by the sheer scale of Todoroki's power. But if I end up facing him, how am I supposed to counter something like that? He knew the rules prohibited him from bringing in any equipment besides the standard hero course items. No steel balls, no coins without those, his railgun lightning chain, and even his defensive thunder aegis were all rendered ineffective. As Todoroki stood in the arena, catching his breath, Kaminari found himself thinking hard about what he'd need to do if he wanted a real chance against his classmate. Juzo Hananuki, can you still move? On the sidelines, Midnight, who was partially frozen herself, trembled from the chill as she asked a question she already knew the answer to. I can't. Hananuki, feeling the numbing cold all over his body, barely managed to shake his frozen face as he whispered. Hananuki is incapacitated. Shoto Todoroki advances to the second round. Midnight cracked her whip, her voice echoing through the speakers. But the crowd stayed silent, staring in awe at the enormous ice formation towering over the arena. The sheer scale of it left them speechless. Kaminari's mother stared wide-eyed, muttering to herself, Was our son up against something like that just now? Why yeah? Kaminari's father stammered, snapping out of his daze. He forced a smile, his voice a mix of pride and disbelief. Our Kaminari. He's really something, isn't he? Down on the field, Todoroki approached the frozen Hananuki and placed his hand on the ice surrounding him. Sorry, I went overboard. I'm not in the best of moods. With that, he used his fire quirk to thaw Hananuki's body. Then, he pressed his palm against the iceberg and began to melt it down, releasing a controlled wave of flames around him to vaporize the excess water. As the towering ice structure melted, steam filled the arena, and within moments, the ground was completely dry. It was as if nothing had happened, leaving the audience even more in awe of Todoroki's precise control. Kaminari chuckled as he rose from his seat, stretching slightly. Guess it's my turn next, he said, walking down toward the arena under Bakugo's watchful gaze. When he reached the corridor, he spotted Midoriya waiting with Uraraka and some of the other students who had come to support him. Uraraka seemed calmer now, though a hint of sadness lingered in her eyes. Kaminari-kun, Midoriya asked, a bit confused as Kaminari paused to look at him. Kaminari just grinned and patted Midoriya on the shoulder. Nothing much. Let's put on a good show, all right? As he walked past, he left Midoriya with a final remark, his voice low but confident. I'm looking forward to this, Midoriya. Kirishima let out a deep breath after Kaminari disappeared down the hall, then turned to Midoriya with a serious expression. Midoriya, you've got to give it everything you've got. Kaminari's no weaker than Todoroki. I know. Midoriya nodded, clenching his fists tightly. Determination filled his eyes as he added, I have my reasons for not holding back. No matter how strong he is, I'll do everything I can to win. He thought of All Might's words to him, about proving himself and letting his actions speak for his strength. He wouldn't disappoint his mentor. Yeah, you got this, Midoriya-kun, Uraraka said, trying to lift his spirits with an encouraging smile, despite her own recent defeat. Kaminari's friends, Tetsu, Kyoka, and Momo, exchanged glances but remained quiet, their expressions carrying a hint of worry. They had all seen Kaminari's strength firsthand. It was a steep challenge, even for someone as determined as Midoriya. As Kaminari and Midoriya arrived in the arena, the faculty prepared themselves. Given the intensity of the previous matches, Yue had assigned an additional teacher to supervise this round. Vlad King, the homeroom teacher of Class 1B. Even All Might, sitting at the faculty table, was visibly tense. He was ready to intervene if Kaminari or Midoriya went overboard. He understood both boys' determination, but also the dangers of their respective powers. If either of them lost control, he'd step in immediately. The crowd roared as the 4 flame towers at each corner of the arena ignited. Present Mick's voice boomed through the speakers, introducing the next competitors. From Class 1A's hero course, it's Kaminari Denki, whose electrifying strength we've all seen before. And facing him is none other than Midoriya Izuku, who has shown impressive resilience and strength in previous events. The crowd cheered even louder. Kaminari's growing popularity was clear, with fans shouting his name, urging him to deliver another thrilling performance. Go Kaminari! Knock him out like Todoroki did. Kaminari! Hit him with 100,000 volts. As they faced each other in the arena, Kaminari eyed Midoriya thoughtfully, noticing the faint arcs of green electricity dancing around him. So, what exactly is your quirk? Kaminari asked, curious. That looks a lot like my high-speed movement. Midoriya hesitated, looking down at the energy flickering around his hands. Well, it's complicated. I guess you could say it's a sort of burst of strength, he stammered, clearly unsure how to explain it. In truth, Midoriya didn't fully understand it himself. Unlike his canon counterpart, he hadn't meticulously studied how to use One for All. His current state was something he'd stumbled into, without any clear method. All right then. Let's see what you've got, Midoriya. Kaminari shrugged, brushing off the lack of a clear answer. His own body crackled to life with golden electricity, signaling that he was ready to go all out. Then let's find out how your version of high-speed movement stacks up against mine. To the crowd's amazement, the two fighters looked almost identical in that moment, both wrapped in crackling energy, each facing down the other with fierce determination. Without warning, Kaminari moved first, surging forward like a bolt of lightning. The sheer speed of his approach made Midoriya's eyes widen in shock. "What's wrong? Did you forget already?" Kaminari said, his voice calm yet intense. "Weren't you going to do your best to beat me?" The words spurred Midoriya to action. With a deep breath, he steadied himself, focusing all his willpower as Kaminari's electrified fist swung towards him. Whoosh! Facing Kaminari's high-speed electrified fist, Midoriya didn't dare to block it head-on. Instead, he planted his right foot on the ground and quickly slid back a couple of meters, narrowly avoiding the attack. Boom! As Kaminari relentlessly closed the distance, Midoriya punched forward into the air. The force of his punch distorted the air, creating a powerful gust that barreled toward Kaminari. Sizzle, but Kaminari's expression didn't waver. Casually, he sidestepped to the right, evading the gust with ease. A few strands of his blonde hair fluttered up from the wind, but he was otherwise unfazed. Having watched Midoriya in action many times before, Kaminari knew better than to rush in without a plan. Yet something about Midoriya's current attack felt off. It was weak, surprisingly so. Compared to the raw, intense power Midoriya usually displayed, this punch felt almost restrained, as if he was holding back. Sizzle Kaminari resumed his pursuit, while Midoriya seemed intent on keeping his distance, constantly evading close combat. For 3 whole minutes, Kaminari chased Midoriya around the arena, occasionally striking out, only for Midoriya to narrowly evade or deflect his blows with controlled punches, each releasing a gust of wind in Kaminari's direction. Crackle, unlike me, Kaminari's energy is real electricity, Midoriya thought, cautiously watching Kaminari while keeping a safe distance. Touching him directly would be a huge mistake. All I need to do is wear him down. Eventually, his electricity will run out. As Midoriya continued his evasive maneuvers, he planned his next move. Or, I could find a chance to use a full power punch and knock him out of bounds. To the spectators, the scene was a spectacle. 2 figures, one cloaked in golden lightning, the other in green energy, chased each other across the massive concrete arena, moving at speeds that few could even follow. From time to time, flashes of lightning and bursts of air pressure filled the space, creating an intense, mesmerizing show. Even present Mike, known for his constant commentary, found himself momentarily silent, caught up in the action alongside the rapt audience. Meanwhile, Kaminari began to understand the nature of Midoriya's ability. The energy Midoriya was using was different from his own electrically charged movement. Kaminari's speed came from his control over electric currents stimulating his muscles, but Midoriya's speed was purely physical. He's using raw power to create speed, Kaminari thought, observing Midoriya carefully as they both halted for a brief moment. It's not that his quirk has changed. He's still using that same explosive strength, but he's figured out how to spread that power throughout his entire body, not just his fists. Kaminari evaluated their strengths and weaknesses. In terms of pure speed, we're about evenly matched, but his punches pack a lot more force. Still, I have the edge in one way. My attacks carry an electric shock. For a moment, the arena was still, as both fighters stared each other down. What's going on? Why'd they stop? Present Mick's voice echoed, breaking the tense silence. Ignoring the commentator, Kaminari flashed a confident smile at Midoriya, one that the cameras caught perfectly. Is this all you've got? Kaminari asked, a hint of challenge in his tone. Midoriya's eyes widened, a hint of confusion breaking through his concentration. Here's a heads up, Kaminari continued, his smile fading into a serious expression. You'd better bring out that smash of yours, because I'm done holding back. When I go all out, it gets intense. Suddenly, the electricity surrounding Kaminari's body surged, crackling louder as his hair lifted, charged by the energy radiating from him. Boom! High voltage mode activated, Kaminari announced, his voice tinged with determination. With a surge of power, Kaminari was enveloped in a blazing aura of golden electricity, arcs of lightning dancing dangerously around him. Then, in the blink of an eye, he vanished, leaving only a charred spot where he had been standing. In an instant, Kaminari reappeared as a golden streak, rocketing towards Midoriya like a bolt of lightning. His speed was so extreme that even the arena cameras struggled to keep up. He's so fast, Midoriya thought, instantly recognizing that Kaminari was far quicker than he could react to. Smash! Desperate, Midoriya unleashed a full-powered punch, even though he knew it would likely injure him. He swung at the empty space in front of him, detonating his quirk to create a shockwave that distorted the air in front of him. Now's my chance, Kaminari thought, eyes lighting up as he closed in on the explosive shockwave. In the stands, All Might was already halfway out of his seat, his eyes wide with concern. He knew that one miscalculated punch from Midoriya could do serious damage, perhaps even put Kaminari in the hospital. On the teacher's platform, Aizawa squinted, considering whether he should activate his erasure quirk to prevent an accident. But before he could decide, Kaminari had already reached Midoriya. Nearby, Bakugo and Todoroki watched the scene intently, their expressions serious. Boom! Midoriya's punch created a massive shockwave, sending turbulent waves of air rushing toward the audience. The force was intense enough to cause spectators in the stands to shield their faces from the blast. But before anyone could panic, thick concrete walls rose up from the ground, shielding the audience from the wind. Phew, just in time, Cementos muttered, his hands pressed firmly against the ground as he controlled the walls. However, the power of Midoriya's blast was even greater than he anticipated. The first 3 walls cracked and crumbled in seconds, and it wasn't until the 5th wall that the shockwave was finally contained. Many in the audience sat back, breathing sighs of relief. For a moment, they'd felt the full brunt of Midoriya's raw strength, and it was terrifying. As the dust settled, all eyes returned to the arena, eager to see the outcome of the clash. When the dust cleared, the sight left everyone stunned. Midoriya stood frozen, his arm extended from his powerful punch. But just inches away, Kaminari's fist hovered, stopping short of a strike that could have hit Midoriya. Midoriya's arm trembled, his face a mix of shock and awe as he stared at Kaminari. "How?" he murmured. Kaminari's voice, calm and steady, echoed across the arena. "You lose, Midoriya." On the ultra-clear big screen, Kaminari stood tall behind Midoriya, who was still frozen in place. Kaminari's hand was resting gently on the back of Midoriya's neck, a move that suggested he could release a shock at any moment. How is this possible? Midoriya felt the warmth of Kaminari's hand on his neck, his entire body stiff as he tried to process what had happened. He couldn't understand it. He hadn't even seen when Kaminari managed to get behind him. The audience, along with the commentator present Mike, was equally stunned. Mike, ever the curious host, immediately asked the technical team to play a slow-motion replay of the last few seconds on the big screen above the stadium. On the screen, everyone watched as Kaminari, covered in golden lightning, suddenly ducked low and slid under Midoriya's arm at the very moment Midoriya launched his 100% smash. Kaminari's movement was quick, almost graceful, like a fluid shadow slipping past unnoticed. "Whoa!" The crowd erupted in astonished cheers and gasps. The precision of Kaminari's maneuver left many viewers in awe. How was he able to move so smoothly in such a short time, especially with that kind of speed? Present Mike exclaimed, his voice brimming with disbelief. And his timing? Mike trailed off, seemingly lost for words. "Good timing," Aizawa, Class 1A's homeroom teacher, muttered in disagreement. His voice was soft, but the crowd nearby caught it and quieted to hear his explanation. "No, it wasn't just good timing." "Huh?" Mike looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Timing wasn't the key here," Aizawa continued. Kaminari didn't just react in the moment. He knew what Midoriya was going to do before it happened. He anticipated it. The audience murmured in confusion. How could he have known? Some of them asked. The idea seemed impossible, even absurd. Aizawa's expression didn't change as he elaborated. "Remember what Kaminari said to Midoriya before the match? He told him to be prepared and encouraged him to go all out. Kaminari baited him, knowing Midoriya would interpret his words as a challenge. With Kaminari showing such overwhelming speed, Midoriya thought he had no choice but to use his full strength. The crowd fell silent, processing Aizawa's analysis. Even some pro-heroes in the stands exchanged thoughtful looks. This wasn't just a display of physical skill, Aizawa concluded, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Kaminari on the field. It was a calculated plan. Every move Kaminari made was designed to lead Midoriya exactly where he wanted. All Might, watching from the stands, clenched his fists. He realized now that Midoriya's loss wasn't a matter of strength alone. Kaminari's experience and tactical thinking were on a different level. This is more than just a difference in power. All Might muttered to himself, feeling a pang of regret for his student's defeat. Back on the field, Midoriya looked up at Kaminari, his face showing a mixture of frustration and admiration. Releasing his quirk, he let the green sparks dissipate, finally understanding where he had gone wrong. "Is it true?" Midoriya asked softly, as though he needed confirmation. Kaminari let go of Midoriya's neck, smiling slightly. "Yeah, it's not just about raw power," he said gently. "You've got a great quirk, Midoriya, but you need to recognize its tells. Every time you use that full-strength punch, there's this noticeable red glow. It's like a signal, telling your opponent exactly what's coming." Midoriya's shoulders slumped, and he looked down at his bruised right arm, wincing at the pain. I see," he murmured, accepting his mistake. The cheers from the audience rose again, and Kaminari looked around, giving Midoriya a friendly pat on the shoulder. "I lost," Midoriya said, finally turning to Midnight, the referee. He lifted his head, though his eyes betrayed his disappointment. "It's okay," Kaminari said with a smile, trying to cheer him up. "You fought well." Midoriya offered him a grateful, if slightly sad smile. "Thank you, Kaminari." From the stands, All Might watched, a sense of pride mixed with regret in his eyes. He had wanted Midoriya to succeed, but seeing his student learn from this loss was equally valuable. Meanwhile, elsewhere, in a dimly lit hideout, a figure watched the match on a small screen, his voice a sinister murmur. That Kaminari kid. He's sharp, stronger than I expected," Shigaraki said, observing Kaminari's every move with a cold intensity. "We'll have to keep an eye on him." Back in the medical bay, Kaminari watched as the recovery girl began tending to Midoriya's injured arm, a worried look on his face. "Midoriya, that quirk of yours. It's powerful, but it seems to hurt you every time you use it at full strength," Kaminari said carefully, trying not to pry too much. Midoriya, lying on the bed, gave a sheepish smile. "Yeah, it's a bit hard to control. I'm still working on it." But before Kaminari could ask more questions, recovery girl shooed him out of the room. "Go on now. He needs rest," she said, pushing him gently towards the door. As Kaminari walked out, he glanced back thoughtfully, his mind still on Midoriya. "I don't know. There's something different about his quirk," Kaminari thought, trying to put the pieces together. Could it be? But he shook his head, dismissing the thought for now. He had another match to prepare for. Meanwhile, the tournament continued. The fourth match saw Ida against Hatsum Mei from the support course. Hatsum managed to dazzle the audience with her endless gadgets, turning the match into a product showcase, while Ida, though flustered, eventually secured a win. He left the arena looking both proud and deeply embarrassed. In the fifth match, Ashido Mina faced off against Aoyama Yuga. With her agility and quick reflexes, Ashido managed to overcome Aoyama's laser attacks, securing her spot in the next round. The crowd cheered on, energy high as the matches continued. Then, Kaminari's focus turned to the next battle on the field, one that promised to be intense. Class 1A's Tokoyami Fumikage versus Class 1B student. Tokoyami, known for his dark and enigmatic quirk Dark Shadow, had shown impressive skill in previous simulations. His quirk was versatile and powerful, but Kaminari and the others knew little about its true limits. As Kaminari made his way back to the stands, he spotted Shinso leaning against a shadowed corner, his eyes reflecting a quiet determination. Seeing the person waiting in the shadows, Kaminari set aside his curiosity about Midoriya for the moment. Putting on a friendly smile, he walked over and greeted him. "Shinso-kun, Kaminari Denki." Shinso, leaning against a dark corner, slowly lifted his head to meet Kaminari's gaze. His piercing, triangular eyes studied Kaminari, and after a moment, he asked in a low voice, "What's with the electricity around your body?" From Shinso's perspective, Kaminari's body was wrapped in erratic golden currents. "Oh, this." Kaminari glanced down at himself, then looked back up, replying casually, "Just a little insurance, Shinso-kun. After all, talking with you is a bit riskier than with most people." "Is that so?" Shinso raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "So, these electric currents are supposed to keep you safe from me?" Kaminari shrugged. "Maybe. I haven't actually tested it yet." "Then test it." Without hesitation, Shinso activated his quirk. Kaminari's mind went blank for an instant, but almost immediately, he felt his consciousness snap back. Shinso's eyes widened, confused. Looks like I was out for less than a second, Kaminari noted, glancing at the distant clock on the big screen. Turning back to Shinso, he grinned. Seems my insurance plan works. This was a defensive trick he developed after his first encounter with Shinso's quirk. Finally having the chance to test it out with Shinso himself, he couldn't help feeling a bit pleased. The idea was simple. Since breaking free from mind control typically required a physical jolt, he wondered if the electric currents flowing inside and outside his body could provide that jolt automatically. Basically, by continuously stimulating his body with electricity, he could potentially snap himself out of any mental control, whether it was high-speed movement or high-voltage mode. Both techniques had this passive effect of disrupting other quirks. Heh, Shinso let out a dry laugh. Just as I thought. Once people know about my quirk, it becomes much harder to use effectively. Though he'd managed to control Uraraka Ochiko in the previous round, he hadn't counted on it as a reliable strategy. That success had felt more like a fluke. True, Kaminari agreed, then asked, so why'd you join the sports festival? He couldn't help but voice his curiosity. If I had a quirk like yours, I'd probably keep it hidden. If I used it, it'd only be as a trump card, something to pull out in a critical moment. Competing in a public event like this, where everyone gets to see your abilities, doesn't seem like the best strategy. Shinso's face darkened, his arms falling from their crossed position as he clenched his fists tightly. You think everyone's like you, blessed with some flashy quirk, he said, his voice edged with bitterness. Huh. Kaminari tilted his head, caught off guard. You want to know why I'm here? It's because this festival is my one chance. If I perform well enough, I might get transferred into the hero course. Shinso's voice grew tense, his frustration spilling over. Because of my quirk, I've always been left behind, forced to watch from the starting line while others move ahead. If I don't make an impact here, if I don't stand out now, my goal of becoming a hero will stay out of reach forever. He looked down, his voice dropping to a murmur filled with resentment. But someone like you, a genius with a powerful quirk, wouldn't understand what that feels like. Kaminari didn't argue. He didn't feel the need to talk about the years he'd spent honing his own abilities. It wouldn't mean anything to Shinso, and would probably just come off as boasting. Instead, he asked, can I ask when you realized that your quirk would make getting into the hero course difficult? Shinso hesitated, then replied, back in my first year of junior high. I looked up the details of the entrance exam for UA, and saw the emphasis on practical skills. And what did you do in the years after that? Kaminari's gaze drifted to the field below, where Tokoyami and a student from Class B were already engaged in battle. But his question was clearly directed at Shinso. What did I do? Shinso repeated, sounding annoyed. What could I do? My quirk doesn't work on robots. So, Kaminari turned to look at him directly, his voice calm. After realizing your quirk's limitations, you didn't think about how to compensate for them. These last 3 years, you were preparing 2 backup plans, aiming for both the hero course and the general studies course, and hoping that one day at a sports festival, you'd get the chance to take a shortcut. Yeah, was there another option? Shinso's expression was defiant, but his voice softened, as though he was questioning himself. Actually, yes. Kaminari glanced back down at the field. If I were you, I wouldn't have wasted those 3 years. I would have trained in swordsmanship, archery, or any other skills to help make up for my quirk's limitations. Even if you had to practice on your own, there are plenty of hero training centers and professionals out there. You could have found someone to teach you. Kaminari looked away from the fight. This match was one-sided, with Tokoyami dominating as expected. If your quirk doesn't work well in the practical exam, then rely on other skills to earn enough points. Use whatever tools you have, whether that's a bow, a sword, or anything else. Of course, you can still treat this sports festival as your backup plan, but only after you've given your best effort in every other area. He turned back to Shinso, whose face was now shadowed, his expression unreadable. So from my perspective, you're someone who talks about dreams and goals, but doesn't understand what effort actually means. There's no goal without effort. An entrance exam didn't go your way, so you chose to take a shortcut. What will you do when you face bigger obstacles in the future? Just keep looking for shortcuts. Shinso lowered his head, absorbing Kaminari's words in silence. Just then, the crowd erupted in cheers as Tokoyami forced his opponent out of the ring. The cheers grew louder, echoing through the arena. When the noise finally died down, Shinso spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. In the second round, I'll be facing Shoto Todoroki. I know I'll lose. Kaminari nodded. Yeah, Todoroki won't fall for your quirk like Uraraka did. He's too aware of his surroundings. Turning to leave, Kaminari felt a twinge of disappointment in Shinso. He'd expected more from someone who seemed so determined. But as he began to walk away, Shinso's voice stopped him. One last thing. Is it too late for me to work hard now? Kaminari paused, then answered softly without looking back. I don't know, but I'd suggest you talk to Mr. Aizawa. He's got a similar kind of quirk. Yo, Kaminari. As Kaminari made his way back to the seating area, Tetsu, who had been scanning the crowd for him, immediately waved him over with a grin and pointed to the seat he'd saved. Hey, I saved you a front row seat. Nice. I'm looking forward to the next match. It's Bakugo's turn, Kaminari replied, nodding at Kyoka, Momo, and the others as he took his seat beside Tetsu. He looked around, wondering to himself, has Bakugo already gone down to the field? Yep, Kirishima answered from the row behind him, his curiosity piqued. By the way, does anyone here know what kind of quirk that Shiozaki girl from Class B has? Ashido, Azui, and the others exchanged blank glances, and then collectively shook their heads. Just then, Monoma from Class B popped his head out from behind the nearby wall, smirking. Honestly, you Class A guys are so arrogant. You don't even know your opponent's quirk, huh? Just because you've fought some villains. You think you're untouchable. The Class B rep, Kendo Itsuka, quickly appeared and, clearly exasperated, dragged Monoma back with an apologetic smile. Sorry about that, everyone. Then she glanced toward the field, where Shiozaki was emerging from the dark tunnel. But just so you know, she's really strong. Don't underestimate her. Maybe, Kaminari murmured, his gaze shifting to Bakugo's intense expression on the other side of the stadium. But the real fireworks are probably coming up. The match began with cheers from the crowd and the energetic commentary of present Mike. Bakugo strode onto the concrete arena, glancing up at the stands. For a moment, his gaze lingered on Kaminari and Todoroki. Their recent performances flashed through his mind. A swift, overwhelming victory from Kaminari and Todoroki's near-effortless power. He clenched his fists, seething with frustration. He was determined to make his mark here, to win in a way that would leave no doubt about who was the strongest. I'm not losing to them. I'm the strongest in Class A. Present Mick's voice echoed across the stadium once more, and the crowd's excitement swelled at Bakugo's presence. They hadn't forgotten his explosive prowess during the cavalry battle. Man, I hope he does that move again. Yeah, that massive blast was epic. Not likely. He's up against a girl this time. No way he'd go all out like that. True, he acts hot-headed, but he's still here to be a hero, right? Yeah, that howitzer move. Only someone like Kaminari Denki or Shoto Todoroki could handle that kind of power. No, Midoriya is pretty strong too. Did you see the punch he threw in the first round? The chatter quieted as Present Mike announced the start of the match, and all eyes turned back to the field. If you want to make a statement, then go all out. Bakugo's gaze hardened as he stared down Shiozaki, whose calm demeanor radiated an almost saintly aura. His expression twisted into a fierce snarl. Go full throttle and crush the opponent. Boom. Without a second's hesitation, Bakugo leaped into the air, using his explosions to propel himself upward. Then, with a series of rapid blasts to his left and right, he spun himself into a high-speed rotation, closing in on Shiozaki like a spiraling inferno. To the crowd, it seemed as if Bakugo had disappeared, replaced by a horizontal whirlwind of flames and smoke. Explosive tornado? Kaminari muttered, wide-eyed as he watched the spectacle. Is it really possible to push a quirk like this? Using the explosive recoil to stabilize himself mid-spin while generating a high-temperature whirlwind. It was a remarkable display of precision and power. Is he really calculating all of this, or is it just pure instinct? Kaminari wondered, impressed. His own fighting style relied on precise, micro-level control of his electricity, while Todoroki could unleash overwhelming power thanks to his quirk's natural affinity. But Bakugo, he was a mix of both. His aggressive nature and innate combat instincts allowed him to wield his explosions with devastating effect. Bakugo's move left the students of Class B visibly uneasy. His technique radiated danger, and it was clear he wouldn't hold back. Come on, Shiozaki. Block him. Stop that maniac with your vines. On the field, Shiozaki turned to face Bakugo's incoming attack. She spread her arms, her green hair rooting into the ground and sprouting into a forest of thorn vines that surged forward to intercept him. The scene resembled Todoroki's earlier ice barrage, though on a smaller scale. But even so, Shiozaki's vines quickly filled the entire concrete arena. Yet, to her shock, her wall of vines couldn't withstand Bakugo's spinning assault. Every time her vines approached him, they were blasted apart by the shock waves from his explosions or scorched by the searing heat. A natural counter. From the commentary booth, Aizawa-sensei narrowed his eyes, analyzing the scene. Bakugo's quirk generates intense heat and pressure, making it a natural threat to plant-based quirks. Combined with his greater physical power, Shiozaki doesn't stand much chance in a head-on clash. Thunder idiot. Half and half. Bakugo seethed in his mind, the faces of Kaminari and Todoroki flashing before him. Watch closely. This is me, going beyond my limits. I will never be weaker than you. No way in hell. With a final defiant shout, Bakugo unleashed the full force of his right hand in a blinding burst, charging it to the max as he smashed into Shiozaki's vine barrier. Howitzer. Super blast. Boom. The explosion was so intense that the concrete floor vanished beneath a cloud of black smoke and debris. A scorching wave of hot air swept through the arena, leaving the entire audience stunned. People struggled to breathe, the sheer pressure from the blast leaving them momentarily gasping for air. Hats, loose items, and anything not held down were blown skyward in the aftermath. It took nearly 10 seconds for the explosion's shockwave to subside. When the smoke finally cleared, Bakugo stood alone in the center of a massive crater, his right arm hanging limply from the strain. The concrete around him was completely scorched, revealing the raw earth beneath. The once flat arena was now a scene of utter devastation. Wah, where's Shiozaki? No way. That was way too much. Yeah, to go that hard against a girl. Does he really want to be a hero? Is he trying to kill Shiozaki? Monoma shouted furiously from the Class B section. For the first time, his dislike of Bakugo was genuine and intense. In the audience, some began muttering complaints, while online chat rooms flooded with angry comments. But this time, Aizawa-sensei didn't step in to calm things down. Even he had to admit that Bakugo might have gone too far. Though it was respectable to treat one's opponent seriously, Bakugo's attack had clearly exceeded the bounds of a simple competition. This was an explosion beyond his usual limits, one that could have been lethal if Shiozaki had been caught in it. However, Bakugo seemed unfazed by the criticism. His focus remained solely on Kaminari and Todoroki, who watched him from the stands. I will be the one to surpass all might and become the strongest hero. Meanwhile, Aizawa-sensei spotted Shiozaki safely standing at the edge of the arena, with Class B's homeroom teacher beside her. Thankfully, we took precautions. At the last second, the Class B teacher, Vlad King, had used his quirk, manipulating his own blood to form a rope and pull Shiozaki to safety. He had even created a blood-red shield to absorb any remaining impact from Bakugo's blast. Aizawa sighed, realizing the intensity of the matches had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. I'll need to supervise Kaminari and Todoroki's next fight myself. Or better yet, maybe All Might should keep an eye on them too. With that thought, Aizawa rose from his seat and quietly headed for the door. Present Mike noticed and called after him, surprised. Hey, where are you going? To find the principal. Tetsu Kirishima, after seeing Bakugo's move just now, do you think your quirks could handle it? Kaminari asked quietly, watching Bakugo as he stubbornly declined assistance from the transport robot, supporting his exhausted body and slowly making his way into the corridor. Both Tetsu and Kirishima fell silent. While their quirks provided them with strong defensive capabilities, it didn't mean they were invincible. If they exceeded their quirk's limits, they could still be injured, or worse. You don't think you could take it, right? Kaminari continued, addressing the unspoken realization of the Class 1A students around him. Then maybe it's time to think about how you deal with attacks of that magnitude. Tetsu and Kirishima exchanged glances. After a moment, Kirishima flashed a determined grin, instinctively reaching up to touch his dyed red hair. For me, there's only one path forward, Kirishima declared confidently. and that's to keep pushing my hardening to new heights. I'm committed to this route, just like my idol, the hardened hero Crimson Riot. If I'm not tough enough, then I'll make myself tougher. Tough enough to withstand anything that comes my way. He turned to look at Tetsu, who usually shared his goals and ideals. That's the same for you, right? Tetsu remained silent. If he'd been asked this question earlier, his answer would have been identical to Kirishima's. But after spending time with Kaminari and being mentored by Daimon-sensei, his perspective had started to shift. He was no longer focused solely on pure strength and defense. Now he was thinking more about technique and versatility. Hey, Tetsu. Kirishima raised his voice, surprised by his friend's hesitation. Didn't you tell me once that you wanted to compete with me for the title of the strongest hardcore hero in the future? At first, Tetsu's challenge had bothered Kirishima. But over time, he'd come to appreciate having a rival, someone else with the same goals and convictions. Yet now, Tetsu was hesitating. What did that mean? Had he given up on the path of being hardcore? If that was the case, then Kirishima couldn't help but feel disappointed. I'm telling you, Tetsu, to be the strongest hardcore hero, you have to have the toughest defenses. That's the only way. Tetsu's gaze grew resolute as he stood up, meeting Kirishima's intense stare. Being the strongest hardcore hero doesn't mean having the hardest quirk. It's about overall strength. Kirishima's face twisted in frustration, veins bulging on his neck. He grabbed Tetsu by the collar, his grip reinforced by his quirk. What's the point of being a hardcore hero without being the hardest there is? Remember this, Kirishima said, voice thick with conviction. No matter what your quirk is, if you're taking the hardcore path, there's only one way forward. Make yourself harder and harder. That's the way Crimson Riot proved it. Bang! Crack! With his body steeled by his quirk, Tetsu gripped Kirishima's hand firmly, prying it off his collar as he held his ground. I'm going to walk my own path, Kirishima. Not Crimson Riot's. With that, he released Kirishima and turned, striding towards the exit. Their next match was about to begin. Come on, I'll show you what my path looks like. Clang. Kirishima, usually easygoing, was clearly unwilling to back down when it came to this kind of principle. To him, the path of being hardcore was something sacred, not something you could just redefine on a whim. He clenched his fists so tightly that the sound of metal clashing reverberated, and he followed Tetsu toward the arena, his furious expression drawing worried glances from their classmates. Kirishima, Ashido called after him, but he cut her off sharply. There's only one hardcore path. He can go his own way if he wants, but he doesn't get to call it hardcore. The term hardcore can only be used to describe the path Crimson Riot paved. With that, he strode toward his designated entry corridor, his focus intense. Kaminari, do you think they'll be all right? Kyoka asked, her voice laced with concern. Yeah, they look like they were really going at it. Momo added, worry clear on her face. Kaminari gave a reassuring nod. Don't worry. There will be 3 teachers watching over them during the match. Then he looked toward the field, his own excitement building. This is what you'd call a true battle of convictions. Between the two of them, Kaminari found himself more in agreement with Tetsu. Taking a more versatile approach seemed more realistic to him than focusing everything on just durability. But what exactly is Tetsu's method? He wondered, intrigued. By now, the cement stadium, recently destroyed by Bakugo's battle, had been restored to pristine condition by the school's Omni-sensei. At the same time, Present Mic's booming voice filled the air once more. The 8th match of the first round. A showdown between 2 quirks of raw, unstoppable power. On the big screen, both competitors' images appeared side by side, striking similar poses, which made the crowd chuckle. Representing the unbreakable spirit of steel. It's Tetsu, and facing him, embodying the will of unyielding rock. It's Kirishima Ijiro. But despite Present Mic's enthusiastic introductions, neither Tetsu nor Kirishima responded. The tension between them was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. Kirishima's gaze was full of defiance, while Tetsu's eyes remained calm and determined. Begin. Boom. You need to show some respect for the hardcore path and Crimson Riot. Kirishima shouted, his arms hardened as he charged forward, fury fueling his movements. Bam! With his entire body transformed into steel, Tetsu charged forward without hesitation, meeting Kirishima's attack head-on. Of course, I respect him, but my choice is still the right one, under the watchful eyes of 120,000 spectators. These two determined young men, each driven by their own beliefs, roared and clashed in the center of the ring. Boom! Their fists, one hardened to stone and the other gleaming like polished metal, collided with a force that sparked and crackled in the air. Their strength is perfectly matched. Present Mike exclaimed into his microphone, his excitement radiating through the stadium. The crowd erupted into cheers, thrilled by the sheer intensity of the match. As soon as their fists separated, Kirishima, still fuming, swung again, driving his hardened fist forward. What's this method you keep talking about? Isn't this the real hardcore path? Then I'll show you what I mean by my path. Tetsu shot back, his stance shifting as he readied himself. He took up a judo stance, watching as Kirishima charged in recklessly. Just as Kirishima closed the distance to less than 2 meters, Tetsu made his move. Sliding his right foot into position inside Kirishima's right leg, Tetsu turned his body, ducking under Kirishima's punch. Using his right hand, he grabbed Kirishima under his left arm and leaned into him, using Kirishima's momentum against him. Then, with a twist of his hips, Tetsu hurled Kirishima high into the air, slamming him down onto the concrete floor. Crash! As Kirishima's hardened back struck the ground, the arena floor shattered beneath him, splintering like it was made of brittle tiles. Tetsu exhaled a steadying breath, looking down at the stunned Kirishima. To be the strongest, you need more than just toughness. You need to combine technique, strength, and durability into one. I might not have the hardest quirk, but I'll be the strongest in history. Kirishima, remember this. I'm following the path of the unbreakable, not just the hardest.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going. Plus, it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.